Two, hello. Two. Hello, folks. Oh, shit. Sorry. Old Sisyphus has got to let that ball roll down the hill again. It's the way of the future. I'm glad that's catching on for you, Brian. I like that. I think that can be incorporated into official an official TRRS catchphrase at this point. It's the way of the future. How are you all doing? How's it going? You have a good morning? Whispers loudly in my partner's ear. That's noted Canadian Twitch streamer Rob Rousseau. Chin. Let's get this party started properly. I would love for someone to alienate a date or potential romantic partner by insisting that they watch this stream. One of those things, like when you're trying to introduce something that you really like to somebody, and you're like looking at them, like waiting. No, like just wait though. Just wait. This is where it gets really good. And I'm just sitting here talking around like fucking beverages or whatever. And you're like, no. When he gets past this, it's going to be really good. Just believe me. And they're like, and I don't blame them, frankly. I don't know what you're doing here. Believe me. After this basketball, just let him get this out of his system. It should be only like 25, 30 minutes of this. I lied. I don't have Netflix. Sit down. We're learning about Juche. I don't know what the hell you people are doing here, to say nothing of your potential romantic partners. Let me break down the friendship triangle to you. It's not weird, honestly. It's a clever jape. You show the Stalin book, you have to be like, well, you see, you have some uncomfortable conversations about your political beliefs. Hear me out here. I know the way that he's saying that it's not a cult, it seems like it's a joke and that it actually is, but it really isn't though. That's the thing. It's like a double joke. Don't worry. I know the way that they're talking about it is like, no, it's not. But when they say that, it seems like it is. But that's part of the humor though, you see. There's many layers to this. Don't worry. When he's on that whole bit about how you need to like cut out people in your life that don't support this community, that's the whole. He's only like 75% joking on that. I've talked about the stream to my partner and she hasn't fled yet. Well, that's how you know you got to keep her. You know? He doesn't mean you. Yeah. That's how you know you have a keeper. You know? It's like that. It's like Wayne's World. If you blow chunks and she comes back, she's yours. If you spew and she bolts, it was never meant to be. But it's like that with this show instead of vomiting. I was told to watch this chat or else. Well, there we go. That's the kind of attitude that I like to see from community members. How was my May Day? It was nice. Unfortunately, my work that I do on this stream wasn't supported or respected enough, which is disappointing to say the least, but whatever. Here I am again. Excuse me. Here I am again, day in, day out, performing and entertaining people. Who cares about that though, right? I did also readily admit on the second date that I read Mao and Lenin, so I knew then she was probably a keeper. You really do have to just get that stuff out of the way, right? You just got to get that stuff out of the way immediately. Maybe we're going to cut those people out anyway, and Rob's just giving you the nudge you need. I'm trying to help. I'm trying to help people. If she can't handle me at my TRRS, she doesn't deserve me in my Arrested Development for the 30th time. Excuse me. So everyone's doing well. I'm enjoying this Monster Energy. I'll tell you that much. I had a bit of a disappointing morning. I had a bunch of work to do that I wasn't able to get to last night. I really want to finish Better Call Saul now. I've got 2 more episodes of Better Call Saul, and I really want to finish it. I'm definitely going to finish it tonight. But I wanted to try and watch an episode this morning, and I didn't get around to it. I'm really looking forward to those final 2 episodes, though. I'm going to be kind of sad when it's finished. I might go back through it now, too, Brian, because like when it started, I think I watched the first season like when it was on. Which is now, what, 6 years ago? 7 years ago? And I took like years off from watching it. I took like a 2 or 3 year break from following it or keeping up with it. So I might just start it over again as well. Oh yeah, Carrier, if you got to catch up on those last 5 and 6, Jesus, you really do. I put it off for a long time as well. But I was just completely stunned by how fucking good it was. I'm rewatching Succession and there's so many callbacks. I would also like to rewatch that as well. I did feel like this whole like Living Plus thing, storyline from the latest episode, it felt like a little bit like it was just coming out of nowhere, but from reading some of our Succession chat in the Discord, it seemed like the seeds had been planted for that for a while, and I didn't remember. Living Plus. It's a great idea. It's a great wrinkle to throw into the show, but it felt like a little out of nowhere, I guess. Living Plus is so funny. And I love to see our boy Kendall out there. Killing it, getting the big applause when he got back. I was happy for him, I must say. I was happy for him. The numbers. You got to boost those numbers up. Make it make sense. Make it work. Yeah, Succession is definitely that good. I mean, as long as you understand that like these are not good people that you should be rooting for, and then you can kind of like ironically join one of the Succession character fandoms. You know, they're all rich, horrible people, the heads of this like horrific conservative media empire. So it's like, if you understand that, when you're rooting for these characters, it's not like you root for these people in real life. So it's like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, but rich people, a little bit like that. Yeah, they're all awful people. I think someone pointed out it's like Game of Thrones, but like with the Murdoch family and with like the conservative media landscape or the media landscape in general. And really does, I think, even though it's very funny, have some interesting and insightful things to say about like how power works in America. It's like a lifting of the veil, and you can see how sort of these incredibly powerful people are operating and what their values are and their motives are. And it's also satisfying because like these people that have just like lives of such opulence and wealth that like none of us could ever even really understand it, but they're just all miserable. They're all miserable and depressed and fucking hating each other. And of course, because they have the capitalism brain disease, there's never enough. You know, you always have to have more and more and more and more. And they're always like complaining and they're always unhappy and unsatisfied, you know? Can we have a show about downwardly mobile senior millennial communists for once? Well, that would be good too. What about a handsome and charismatic communist streamer? Gets into all kinds of shenanigans. How about that? Just like spitballing. Just spitballing, you know? Being rich seems stressful. I'd be so worried of losing it all. Well, that's the weird dichotomy. Like, it's we don't understand is that, like, these people get to a level of wealth that they could just fucking relax. They have enough money and material possessions that they could just sit by their pool every single day and fucking hang out, which I think would be wonderful, you know, but they can't. They have to be every day trying to get more and more and more and more and more. They can't enjoy it. You know, and they risk losing it all, or they risk going to jail in this pursuit of like more wealth, when really they could just be fucking going on vacation all the time. Do you know what I should do? Do you know what I think I'm going to do right now? I'm going to right now ask ChatGPT to write us a little pitch for a TV series about a middle-aged socialist live streamer, and see if ChatGPT can give us anything if we think we would watch this. Does that sound like fun? I'm kind of curious. Let's see. Yeah, there's a picket line. Exactly. That's exactly why we need to use this. That's exactly right. Write a pitch for... I'm just trying... Okay, hold on a second. Let me see what I can do here. The Death of Stalin movie was like that. I enjoyed that one. Even if it was, I think, contributing to some anti-Stalin slander. I think he was kind of doing that, but it's still very funny. Okay, write a pitch for a half-hour sitcom about a 40-year-old socialist, a somewhat popular 40-year-old socialist live streamer and social media personality, and the kind of interpersonal and political forces that animate his day-to-day life. Let's see what we got here. Okay. Introducing Left of Center, a half-hour sitcom that follows the life of Max, a 40-year-old socialist live streamer and social media personality who's gained a sizable following online. Max is passionate about social justice, equality, and fighting against the oppressive systems that exist in our society, but his online fame comes with its own set of challenges. As Max navigates the world of social media, he's constantly bombarded by trolls and critics who challenge his ideas and beliefs. But Max isn't one to back down from a debate. He's always ready to defend his positions with wit and humor. Off-screen, Max's personal life is just as eventful. He lives in a bustling apartment building with a colorful cast of characters, including his roommate, a free-spirited artist who often inspires Max's political activism, and a conservative neighbor who loves to engage Max in heated debates. This is already going off the rails. As we know, I don't debate. I never debate. Max also finds himself drawn to a fellow activist and live streamer, Sophia, who shares his passion for social justice, but their relationship is complicated by their differing opinions on certain issues, and Max finds himself questioning whether they can make things work. As Max navigates the worlds of social media and activism, he must also confront the real-world political forces that shape his day-to-day life. From rallies and protests to city council meetings and political campaigns, Max is always at the forefront of the fight for social justice. Left of Center is a hilarious and insightful look at the life of a modern-day socialist activist, filled with political satire, witty one-liners, and a cast of characters that will keep you laughing and engaged from start to finish. Whether you're a die-hard socialist or just looking for a good laugh, Left of Center is the perfect show for anyone who wants to explore the world of online activism and the challenges that come with it. I would need some tweaks. I have some notes, definitely. I do have some notes to that, but I think that's a decent starting point for something, though. Need some adjustment, like having a shape-based following. Yeah, exactly. Online activism, Carrier. We have the most important kind. The most important kind of activism that there is. Did you stay up all night preparing this? No. ChatGPT just spat this out. And frankly, this is one of the things that I think is very cool about ChatGPT, the ability that it has the ability to do this. I think it's kind of fucking fascinating. Max, known for developing the Comradely Cube. I think the Comrade Cube is even better. Yeah. I think that's a little bit tighter. Forgot the prompt hardcore Marxist Leninist. Well, we could refine this. You know, this is what I think people get wrong about ChatGPT. You think, oh, ChatGPT can't do these actual things. And I don't think it can either. But what it can do, though, is give you a little basis for something that then you can go in and change and make better. Noted internet techie Max Boulot. That's good. I like that. That's something. We could work with that. Does ChatGPT know about tankies? I don't know. I'm not sure about that. I would watch this, though. Not this, but like the version of this that we're going to workshop and turn into a better thing. Real talk, that's a sticking point in the WGA strike. They want to turn writers into gig workers who just copy and edit AI scripts. Yeah, and that's completely unacceptable, right? Like, and that's totally fucking dangerous. Because again, I think you can use AI to like help humans do things, but the idea that like you can just eventually just totally replace that, I think is fucking terrifying. Okay, ChatGPT, pretend you're a hardcore Marxist-Leninist Maoist with Gonzo-like characteristics, writing a death threat to a Twitter anarchist. I think that would just like short it out. Smoke's going to start coming out of my computer. ChatGPT is not going to know what to handle with that. The one where Max goes to a convoy Chud rally. Exactly. He tries to convert the convoy people into a socialist. Right? This proletariat uprising, he seeks to politically educate these people into the tenets of Marxism-Leninism. Hey, Dakidoon, what's up? Yeah, I will never understand which beverages are the best. Yeah, this one thing I would include. I would change the family situation. I would include stuff about beverages. I would include stuff about the cult-like following and the shapes and all that. ChatGPT. The term tanky is a political epithet used to describe someone who's an adherent or apologist for authoritarian communist governments, particularly those associated with Joseph Stalin and his brand of Marxism-Leninism. Only the most successful application of these ideals ever in human history. ChatGPT. Oh no, how dare we support that? Ooh, oh no. Who lifted this like illiterate serf society out of the fucking dirt and turned Russia into this hub of art and philosophy and an industrial powerhouse and a space exploratory nation in the span of a few decades? I'm sure I would love to see ChatGPT figure out a way to do that without these authoritarian policies. What do you think about that, ChatGPT? Is Max part of a weird collective house polycule? No, it seems like ChatGPT views him as being like a single person who's so alienating that he hasn't found a partner.
You can count on
Couldn't be me.
and have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Hello to the Rob Mob.
10,000 sandwiches. Thank you for the 29 months resub at tier 2. Thank you, 10,000 sandwiches. That was fun. I do enjoy playing around with this. You know, I recognize the dangers of it. I support unequivocally the ability of like actual human being writers to continue having jobs, and writers that generate billions of dollars worth of revenue for massive corporations who should be getting a sizable cut of that. I do enjoy playing around with this stuff. I think it can be a useful tool for writers, but I do unequivocally, unreservedly support the right of human being writers to maintain these positions. Okay, ChatGPT. Pretend you're the leader of an illiterate serf nation and you have to industrialize it, but your annoying fucking Trotskyist friend is being a dick about it. I would love to see someone else figure out a different way to do this, while also defending yourself from constant attacks, from subversion, from economic sanctions, military encirclement, imperialist threats. Oh, I'm sure ChatGPT would just have everyone be nice to each other, right? We would just do peace and love, and everyone would get along, right? That's how that works. You got to be tough. You got to be tough. People, the AI doesn't understand this, and many people that complain about this shit don't understand this either. I like winners, frankly. That's what it comes down to it. You know? I like winners. I don't think there's anything. I'm not going to apologize for that. I know people, our AI is formed from the thoughts and ideas of people that fetishize losing. Personally, I like winners, though. I like supporting winners. Being on strike is nice because I can tune into this stream again. Are you part of the PSAC strike? Echoes? GPT, pretend you've lifted $800 million people out of poverty, but some cokeheads in Brooklyn just don't approve. I like the revolutionaries who don't get executed by a revolutionary tribunal. That's right. Exactly. They shouldn't have been counter-revolutionary. How about that? These old Bolsheviks. Oh no, the old Bolsheviks. Oh no. Not the old Bolsheviks. Do you want to win or don't you? Why are you complaining about this? Ask it how to do a proletarian revolution in the heart of empire. It's not going to be interested in telling you about these things. This is what short circuits ChatGPT. It doesn't want to deal with these tough questions. That's why I would like to have China or someone else write a different AI language model that will have more interesting answers to some of these questions. I actually think there's legs to this idea for a show, frankly. I really do. It would definitely need to be severely tweaked, but I'd watch this. I'd watch this show if it was written by actually intelligent people. Again, not a robot. So what are we doing today, folks? What's on the docket? What do we think? You tell me. I don't know what we're doing. I did think about, it is Taco Tuesday. That's right. We could talk about the WGA strike. We could watch some kind of video content. I know I wanted to get into the Sudan stuff more. Chomsky, we dunked on Chomsky yesterday. Am I playing Jedi yet? No. I don't. I started playing Cyberpunk, and I really don't have enough sort of mental energy or time to devote to another new AAA game. I'm going to keep working on Cyberpunk. I've had to take some time off from Cyber Rob 2077, but I am going to get back into it. I'm not in a huge hurry. It does seem kind of like a cool game, so I would like to play it eventually. I'll probably wait till it goes on sale or something. I am going to have to do more Cyber Rob pretty soon as well. The story of how China and Russia are going to win the future of chips. That would definitely be a big part of the sitcom as well, right? How Max's critical support for the PRC alienates him from his potential comrades who think that because China uses markets that you're not allowed to support them, and their objectively astounding and historic development over the last several decades. Lenin. Was Trump right to say Lenin? I saw some people saying, like, in Russian, that's actually how you say it. I just thought it was funny in general, the whole quote. Have you ever heard of Lenin? As they say in Russia. That was fucking great. God, that was very funny. I don't even think that was a Lenin quote, though. The whole thing about the vote counters or whatever. I don't even think that was a Lenin quote.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all
Lenin.
this.
Thank you, Rob.
Risk Inverse, thank you very much for the 23 months of Tier 1. And you know what that means, Risk Inverse. You know what it means. 1 month away. You're 1 month away from the highly elite, highly exclusive TRRS 24-month golden sub badge. Very exciting. Very exciting stuff. I'm very excited for you, Risk Inverse. Very cool stuff. Very cool. Lenin, 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 Lenin. I'm begging of you, please don't take my man. Don't take my land. It would be better, actually. the Kulak anthem. Lenin, 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 Lenin. I'm begging of you, please don't take my land. Okay. Oh boy. We're really off to the races here today. I'm begging of you, please don't collectivize my farm. Doesn't really roll off the tongue quite the same way. Don't eat my wheat. Oh gosh. I just asked ChatGPT, can you include something about Max's cult-like following known as the Comrade Cube, his partnership with an energy drink corporation, and his fixation on the rapid and incredible development of the People's Republic of China? Okay. Introducing Left of Center, a half-hour sitcom that follows the life of Max, a 40-year-old socialist live streamer and social media personality who's gained a sizable following online. Max's fans, known as the Comrade Cube, are dedicated to his cause and often emulate his every move, leading to some cult-like behavior. Max's popularity has also caught the attention of an energy drink corporation, who sees him as the perfect spokesperson for their new Revolutionary Rush drink. Max struggles with the ethics of partnering with the corporation, but ultimately decides it's a necessary compromise to fund his activism. There's the stuff about the personal life, the bustling apartment building. I don't know about this. Max's fixation on the rapid development of the People's Republic of China leads to some awkward situations, including a disastrous dinner party where he tries to impress his date with his knowledge of Chinese politics, only to realize he's been mispronouncing the names of the leaders the whole time. Come on, ChatGPT, come on. Come on now. Don't do me like that. I don't like it makes Max more unsympathetic, kind of like a schmuck. Yeah, this needs a lot of work. This needs a lot of work, definitely. I would need to specify the support for former Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping. Dengist. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, there's something there definitely. This is exactly why ChatGPT can actually replace human beings, though, right? It can give you a little start, but it gets a lot of things wrong. Revolutionary Rush is pretty good. I mean, that could be a whole funny component where like it's an actual like corporation trying to market to like online socialists. There'd be some kind of funny satire in there. There's a little vein of satire. His cult-like following seizes upon every verbal flub of his, no matter how small or insignificant. There was a caller who grilled Majority Report about the Russia-Ukraine. It was not great. I saw someone share that. I think it was James shared that in the Discord server. Which seemed, from what I didn't watch the segment, but yeah, from what the comments that I was reading about, it seemed pretty bad. I mean, to me, you don't have to support Russia to acknowledge that the US played a role in the Euromaidan, number one. And don't I think it's inexcusable to not know at this point, it's been a year and a half of this, to not know that the arms have been getting pumped into Ukraine for the last 10 years, and that we've been arming and training these groups, these neo-Nazi groups, for the last decade. There's no excuse to not know that. There's plenty of genuine... You don't have to read the gray zone to read this reporting. Like, there's plenty of reporting about this. Mainstream reporting, as we've looked at numerous times on this program, There's no excuse not to know this. Especially being someone who's a smart person, a smart guy like Sam Sater, who I really do respect a lot. But there's no excuse to not have that information. People are so paralyzed with these accusations of supporting Russia that they just ignore basic reality. It's become so controversial to even suggest possibly that they viewed our activities that we've been engaging in as being a threat to their security. To even kind of suggest possibly, or to have a remotely sympathetic viewpoint from their perspective. It's so toxic for people. People have been so fucking beaten down with these kind of accusations that they just ignore basic reality. I don't think there's any excuse for that. I really don't. Like I said, it's not just the gray zone. It's not just these fucking tanky outlets that you don't like. It's not just Jimmy Dore that's been talking about this. There's been tons of mainstream reporting about and when I say our, I mean Canada, the United States, the NATO, the NATO countries, our material support for these neo-Nazi groups over the last 10 years. Two things can be true at the same time, but I don't think liberals or conservatives are capable of complex thinking, especially on foreign policy. One of you said a couple weeks ago about this stream and about a lot of what we talk about on this stream is just convincing people that it's okay to hold two thoughts in your mind at the same time. And that's always stuck with me. I think so many people have a hard time with that. Stoltenberg admitted they were shoveling in weapons since 2014. I mean, even fucking Angela Merkel a couple weeks ago was like, oh yeah, we had never had any intention of following the Minsk agreements. We were just like buying time to continue arming and funding this army to make sure that they could fight the Russians. Like, it's not like this is a secret, you know?
You can count on
it
me
really
and
isn't.
have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
You have to be able to hold two ideas at the same time, like capitalism bad, but Bang energy drink is good.
Thank you. That's Justinian. That's a perfect example. Thank you. Couldn't agree more. Not that I don't think I've tried Bang Energy, but just in general, though, I get it. Thank you, Justinian, for the 22 months tier 1. Thank you. She's trying to walk that back, but you can't though, because we know that it's true. Like you can't, she just didn't, there's been a few examples of high powered people that have been involved in this process, openly admitting this. And then it's like, you can't put that toothpaste back in the tube. Like once you've admitted it. Yeah. You mentioned Michael Brooks. It's like, I would definitely think I would love to have his perspective on this. And definitely like Michael would be someone that, I wouldn't be comfortable yelling at Sam Sater about this stuff, even if I don't agree. If Michael, Michael was someone that I would be comfortable talking to about these things and trying to unpack these things. I like to think, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth. I like to think that he would have a good take on these things and would be able to articulate this take to that audience in a way that was palatable for them. I don't know. I don't even want to watch the clip again. I don't want to. Rob Rizzo takes down Majority Report libs or anything like that. Again, I think Majority Report is great. I have a ton of respect for Sam Sater, and I know he's a very smart guy. But I just think it's frustrating how these kind of foreign policy issues, especially this particular case, has become so fucking difficult for people to just even admit the basic reality of what's been going on. You can do that without supporting Russia. Like it's quite easy, actually. Rob destroys Sam Sater with facts and logic. Yeah, I'm not going to do that. But yeah, not knowing that, thinking that we just started arming Ukrainians in 2020 or 2022, sorry, there's just no excuse for that. There's been so much legitimate, genuine reporting on this. I don't know what the problem is to just understand this basic concept that we've been arming. You can look at that clip of John McCain and Lindsey Graham and Amy Klobuchar in 2016 talking to these people. They're on camera talking to these Azov guys, being like, yeah, we'll get whatever you want as long as you fight the Russians. It's not a conspiracy, it's not that fucking hard to believe. They're literally elected officials, US elected officials on camera being videotaped, talking to these people, being like, we'll get you whatever you need. No problem. Don't worry about it. What the fuck more evidence do you need? This is not some kind of Kremlin funded gray zone tanky Jimmy Dore thing. It's literally the people that were directly involved on video camera talking about what they're doing. This is why I get confused. We only started funding Ukraine in 2022. That's very clearly not true. This information is out there. And the whole thing with the Euromaidan as well. There's legislation as well. And the whole thing with the Euromaidan as well. Oh, I don't know if we can say that the U.S. was involved with that. Like, fucking come on. Really? You have this protest movement and you have these U.S. officials showing up on camera supporting one side of the movement. It's not fucking that complicated to understand what's going on here with that. But there's all these kind of people that democratically supported this and were thought it was a beautiful... Okay, fuck whoever, whatever, I don't care. When you see U.S. officials show up and take one side in that conflict and promote one side, guess what's going on? Does this really need to be explained to people? Yeah, the U.S. is involved. Yeah, it's a color revolution. And then you take all the stuff about like the IMF loans, the Russian gas. You know, they turned down the IMF loans, and lo and behold, there's this organic democratic revolution that pops up that sweeps away the government with the support of, you know, Hillary Clinton and Victoria Nuland. And lo and behold, a pro-NATO, pro-EU government is put into place in this peaceful, democratic, organic transition. Like, and they go ahead and take the IMF loans, of course. You know? It is not fucking hard to figure out what's going on here. And Seeker 22X, like, it's not about being pro-Russia or anti-Russia. It's knowing what imperialism is and recognizing imperialism when it's happening. And recognizing the way that the U.S. government operates and the way they've been operating for decades and decades and decades. This is what they do all over the world. Literally dozens of mainstream articles talking about the huge rise in far-right Ukrainian nationalists gaining power, and everyone just kind of disregards it. Yeah, of course. It's really strange. And then you have these like people who I genuinely view, not trying to be a dick, genuinely view as being very smart people with a lot of the time good analysis of political issues, just being like la 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 la, and just completely ignoring that. It's so wrapped up in Biden's administration, they have to defend it on these grounds now too. Well, to say nothing of the whole thing of like, yeah, under Biden being vice president, this regime change operation takes place, and then Biden's son fucking falls ass backwards in like a crack-induced stupor into this no-show 6-figure job for a Ukrainian gas company. Oh, but that's totally fine. That's totally okay. No corruption there, of course. And in fact, talking about that at all helps Republicans. So you can just never mention that. Like, are you fucking serious? You know? I don't know. And Lamb Fata, I agree. Like, I wouldn't want to put words in anyone's mouth that's not around to defend themselves or to agree or disagree, you know? Like I was saying before, I like to think that Michael Brooks would have a nuanced understanding of this conflict, but I'm not going to put words in his mouth or suggest that he would think one thing or the other thing. Seeker, if you're anti-communist, you are a fascist. Fuck off. Get out of here. I don't like you. Go away. Today was the day of the Odessa fire in 2014 too. Like, this stuff isn't new. Oh, you mean the accidental fire when these people burned to death by accident, did it to themselves in their fight with these Ukrainian nationalists? Of course, yes. Anyway, this is what I don't understand, honestly. Like, I just don't get... I just really don't think there's any excuse not to have this basic understanding of what's been going on. It's not been a secret. Like we looked at the clip from CNN the other day talking about the civil war, like the war in Donbass and the civilians that are being killed by these Ukrainian nationalists. Like CNN was reporting on this 10 years ago. Where were those weapons coming from? Where were those bombs coming from that were being used to kill civilians in the Donbass 10 years ago? They didn't just magically appear in the thin air. Really strange. And you see how the Russiagate laid the seeds to like manufacture consent for all this stuff, you know? And honestly, I regret not realizing that sooner. I don't think I didn't fully buy into the whole Russiagate hysteria, but I will cop to not recognizing the danger of it though. Because now, again, people just become so paralyzed. They become so paralyzed that they're going to miss out on like career opportunities or, you know, lose connections with people because they get accused of supporting Kremlin propaganda. And it makes them completely unable to have a fucking nuanced understanding of anything then. Because anytime you say anything that's remotely suggests that there's any merit whatsoever in Russia's claims, then, you know, you get all these accusations hurled at you. And people are just so paralyzed that they'll just completely ignore basic reality that's been reported in the news. You know? Yeah, or like Malpays is saying as well, you get this whole like online personality thing. So it's like if you suggest anything about the Euromaidan or NATO or anything, well, you're just like a Jimmy Dore fan. And that just means that you're just wrong. So now we have to take the other side of that because we don't like that guy. You know? And it's just, it's not a helpful or... It's not a helpful way to analyze any of these situations when you're analyzing it through the lens of, am I going to be called a Russia sympathizer, or how does this help or hurt my online enemies, you know, in the competing online media ecosystem? Like, that's not a helpful way to understand any of these concepts. Sucks to be forced to defend Jimmy Dore. Yeah, it does suck. Absolutely. And that's the whole thing with Jimmy Dore, is that often Jimmy Dore says things when it comes to foreign policy that I agree with. But it's like you can realize that and recognize that while also recognizing when he goes down this reactionary path on other subjects. And you can realize you can suggest that there are a few things that he has right, just like many conservatives have a more nuanced and detailed understanding of this than a lot of liberals do, while also not agreeing with their reactionary agenda, you know? Jimmy Dore here is like North Korea, just a free-floating signifier that doesn't refer to anything in the real world, just a thought-terminating cliche. Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. Yeah. When things get a little too heated and I have to acknowledge basic reality, you can just say like, well, Jimmy Dore thinks this, and then you can just turn your brain off. And I agree that Jimmy Dore is a dumbass. I couldn't agree more. You know? And you can acknowledge when he gets things right. Just like you can acknowledge when, like, conservatives get some things right when it comes to these foreign policy things. While also not being like they're based anti-imperialists and we need to support their entire reactionary agenda. Or suggest that, like, they must have this, like, prominent spot in media. Like fucking Tucker Carlson. We need more people to be angry. Do you agree with that? I mean, kind of, Ben, but it's like, I think people are angry though. But it's just like, where does that anger go? It gets funneled into these reactionary directions. The anger gets funneled into like, well, vote for the Democrats or vote for the NDP or vote for who cares if Labor is purging all the socialists. If you're angry about housing or the cruel society that the conservatives have built, well, you got to vote for the Labor Party. It gets that anger gets channeled into the worst, most harmful, and conservative anger gets funneled towards like trans people or immigrants or whatever, whatever marginalized outgroup has become the main target of conservatives. That plenty of people are angry. A lot of people, if you're not angry, there's something fucking wrong with you. But none of this anger is being funneled into the proper channels. We don't need people like Dory only poisons the well, but that doesn't mean he's worse than any other dipshit lib or sockdem who doesn't understand history or how to analyze the contemporary moment. Yeah, and like anyone, I think we can acknowledge things that they say that are correct and that are the correct analysis, while not saying that like we need to agree with every single thing that they have to say. It is easy, but for some reason I think a lot of people really struggle with this. Yeah, I can't watch the clip though. I can't do it. But I think that's my basic takeaway though. There's no excuse not to know about some of this basic stuff. There really isn't. You can and should acknowledge the role that NATO has played as being the aggressor in this conflict without being like, I love Vladimir Putin and think that he's cool. It's very easy to do this. Reactionaries temporarily stumble into correct foreign policy opinions out of partisanship most of the time. Yeah, and similar to, like, I always think it's really useful to go back to what George W. Bush was saying prior to his election, who was saying the same kind of thing. Like, these fucking dumbass rubes would be saying the same thing about George W. Bush in 2000 than they say about Tucker Carlson today. Oh, he doesn't believe in nation building. He doesn't want America to go into all these different new wars. And like, look what happens when you actually empower these people. Right? They're just saying that so you'll like them. They don't actually mean these things. Only reason why it's hard is any nuance means they attack you like Emma did saying Kremlin propaganda. And I don't want to watch this clip. I like Emma. I've talked to Emma before. I like Sam Sater. But yeah, I think I think people have been so twisted up and they're so paralyzed by getting these accusations of supporting Putin that's what the reaction is, to anything that's remotely sympathetic to Russia's viewpoint. Anything that's remotely different from just saying like Putin bad, support NATO. And people have become so paralyzed by these accusations that they just can't process anything that's remotely nuanced or remotely sympathetic to Russia's viewpoint without saying Kremlin propaganda. And frankly, the sad thing is, if it was the 50s or the 60s, the 70s, all these people would be saying the same thing. When it came to any foreign policy issues of the past decades, talking about Vietnam. Oh, you're supporting the North Vietnamese. Well, it sounds like you've been lapping up the Kremlin propaganda. Oh, you don't support the Korean War. Well, why do you support Kremlin propaganda? Oh, you don't support Pinochet's regime. Well, why are you? You looks like you've been lapping up that Kremlin propaganda. Like, it'd be the same thing. Like, we have to move beyond this. I think it's a really unhelpful way of analyzing any situation to suggest that like anything that's remotely sympathetic to Russia's viewpoint or China's or North Korea's or Venezuela's by just shutting that down immediately and saying like, well, it's propaganda, you know? I've been saying this for months now, but people like Sam Sater, Emma, or even Hassan have way more of a mainstream audience than any of us, and they still have a paycheck that's dependent on... I'm not going to start hating on Sam or Emma or even Hassan. Yeah, I don't either, but... at all, you know? But I do find it frustrating, you know? You know, I would love to have a more mainstream audience. I would certainly love to have a better paycheck for doing this work. I would, but... frankly, I just happen to believe in this shit, though. That's the unfortunate thing for me. That's the really unfortunate thing for me. I actually do have kind of principles on this that I have a hard time discarding. You know, I probably could have grown this stream audience a lot more over the last years by taking this big, like, pro-Ukraine thing. Many people build big platforms on that. It's not exactly been a popular position here to continue to come on here and make these arguments, but I do it because I happen to believe in this shit. Unfortunately for me. Show the Stalin book. If you said it is a pyramid scheme, that would work. I don't know. I mean, I think that would scare some people away. If I falsely claimed that anything about this community was a pyramid scheme, which would not be accurate. I'm not going to start lying to people. Yeah, this is why I would probably like to end up just seeing if I can...
Count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you, GMO Radio, for the gifted sub to Joseph Stalin. Thank you for that. Every Friday, MR have a guest that talks about the news of the week. You should hook up with Matt Leck and see if they would be amenable to having you on from time to time to discuss foreign policy. It's weird. It's like, I think that I could have a respectful conversation that could maybe promote this viewpoint, but it makes me anxious, though, the thought of having to do that. You know what I mean? I get kind of uncomfortable thinking about this idea of going on and defending these viewpoints to people that I respect that would probably be like uncomfortable by that. Thank you, Diego, for the gifted sub. To Lem Fada, thank you for that. You know, that's what I mean. It's like I'm comfortable here. I'm comfortable just sitting here and carving out my own little space here. And if people want to know what my ideas are, I'm happy to talk about it. You know, if you want to come here and watch what I'm talking about, I'm happy to articulate this viewpoint to people, even if it makes them a little bit uncomfortable. I would feel way more uncomfortable going into a different situation in a different space with a different audience and having to do this, frankly. You know, but that's what I've tried to do here. I've tried to do here is carve out a little space where we can articulate these viewpoints without going full fucking Jimmy Dore or Jackson Hinkle or Haas or whatever, you know, which I find is also extremely alienating to people. That's frankly why I think some of those guys are an op as well, because they take these correct viewpoints and make them completely fucking toxic for people to ever support. And you see, well, the only people that support this viewpoint or have this nuanced analysis or even remotely sympathetic to Russia's viewpoint, well, they're all these like huge, massive dipshits, so they must be wrong. You know? So I've tried my best to carve out a little space on here, on Twitch, to articulate that viewpoint while not being a huge alienating dipshit. You know, that's been my goal that I've tried to pursue on here. I articulate this Kremlin propaganda viewpoint, but in like a fun, relaxed, chill way, you know? I know you call my ass out if I'm alienating or a dipshit. And I don't know, you're honestly, Lodane and Johnny are probably right that I should do other appearances elsewhere. Like, I do need to grow this stream. I do need to grow the audience. I don't know. I don't know what to do. Max Boulot. He might be a tanky, but he's not a dipshit. This is my unique political program that I've put together here. This is why I may end up just like trying to see if I can get hired by like CGTN or like somewhere else. Even though I would be happy to take the knowledge and the skills that I have owned here and, you know, get a job in Canadian media. I've talked about this many times. I don't need to keep going over this with you, but, you know, I would like to be able to take this, the abilities that I have and just get a job in Canadian media. But since it's not possible, since they have no interest in hiring me or platforming this kind of viewpoint, I will probably end up just having to see if I can get hired by one of these foreign state-funded media outlets. Which, if I ever did, I would be open about. A big part of the problem with MR is their audience is super shit-libby. The subreddit and YouTube chats are so lame. But the thing is, Matt, and like in my opinion, there's a way to articulate these viewpoints to that audience. Like, honestly, I've tried to do this on the Insurgents podcast. Like, that's, as I've talked about before, I think that was always a show for me that I thought could have maybe more of a liberal audience, and I could kind of slowly bring them into our web of Kremlin propaganda, you know? And that's what I've tried to do there, and I think I've had some success with that. You know? When Ukraine stuff has come up on there. Rob is very good at calmly talking us through all this. Like, I do think I can do that. Talking to people that have been kind of ensconced in that sort of liberal bubble and articulating these views in a way that's not threatening or alienating. Yeah, you're good about it on there. I think MR Crowd are a bit more emotional about this shit, maybe due to Russiagate and whatnot. And that's what I was saying like a few minutes ago. I think before you showed up, Matt, it's like, I don't think when the whole Russiagate thing was going on that I recognized, and I will cop to this, that I recognized how dangerous it was and how it was being used to... Yeah, how it was being weaponized, basically, and how that the work that was put into like this like Russia hysteria over those years, now when these foreign policy issues come up, it just gets weaponized, and to turn these like sometimes well-meaning progressive people, turn them into like enthusiastic supporters of empire, you know? I don't think at the time I recognized how dangerous that was. I totally thought it was just angry Hillary making excuses. Yeah, and like there was stuff there with like the Trump's team and his shady foreign contacts and stuff. A lot of the fundamental thing about Russiagate was whether you believed that like Hillary Clinton lost because they suck, the Democrats suck, and she was a terrible candidate and person, or whether she lost because of Russia, which I never agreed with. And that's exactly right, Carrier Wave. That's exactly what I mean. For them to let go of Russiagate, they'd have to admit that Hillary lost the election, not that Putler ruined their birthday party. I think that's what these people are never getting over. I think you can be gentle. I also think you can find common ground to help ease them into the idea that you don't accept narrative XYZ entirely. Well, I will give it some thought. I don't know. I definitely do think after it's taken me, I think the few years that I've now been doing this, I have become more comfortable talking about these things. Like even when I started doing this show, talking about China was, I found, still quite difficult. And it's just taken hours and hours of doing it over and over and over again to just get more comfortable, not only like articulating these positions, but articulating them in a way that are like not alienating to people. Yeah, instantly me too. I used to love Rachel Maddow. Seriously, I was a big fan of Rachel Maddow. During the sort of like the Bush years and the early Obama years, I watched Rachel Maddow all the time. I used to watch Rachel Maddow a lot. Then all she talked about was Russia. I didn't even think about it being fake. I was just mad about all the space it took up. She stopped talking about everything else. So I stopped watching. It was like they're literally taking away abortion rights and all the other stuff she ignored. Yeah. And then you look into like, well, who owns MSNBC? Who's funding it? And you realize there's like a specific sort of ideological purpose behind a lot of that. Ugh. I can't watch the clip though. I mean, I've talked about it enough. I can't watch the clip though. It's going to depress me too much. And I think I've already pretty much articulated my view on that in as nice a way as I can possibly do. Never forget that Rachel, until very recently, described Tucker Carlson as a friend she disagrees with. Yeah, of course. I mean, there's to be coworkers. Like it's all kayfabe for these media people, right? They're all going to the same parties. They're all funded by the same people. They all know the same people. They all go to the same schools. They're all part of the same little clubs and groups. Like it's all just a fucking show. It's all just kayfabe. I find hammering on self-determination helpful, i.e. East Ukraine, but once you take apart their foundation, it falls apart. Then you don't have to go into the coup, just East Ukraine voted for the guy ousted and wanted independence. How is that different from West Ukraine? Yeah, frankly, I think the whole Zelensky election trips people up there as well, because they're like, look, he got voted, like people all across the country voted for this, all across Ukraine, in the West and the East. And it's like, yeah, because he was saying, I'm going to end the conflict. And then that immediately became clear that was not an option. I finished Inventing Reality today, and it would be interesting to have a follow-up check-in about narratives people can more closely relate to, like Russiagate, the War on Terror, Libya, and Trump. Yeah, that would be interesting. Echoes. I started it a few days ago, Inventing Reality. I'm still having a hard time deciding whether I want to focus on that or something else right now, but I should probably just dive into that. But it would be helpful. I would fucking love to talk to Michael Parenti about all this stuff, but as we know, he's not really doing public appearances anymore, which is, sad. Definitely a voice that we would be extremely vital to hear from right now. I would like to hear, hasn't Norm Finkelstein been going off about this stuff lately? That's been kind of funny to see, even though he's kind of gone down this unfortunate, I think, kind of crank path as well, talking about cancel culture. I mean, Norm, unfortunately, someone who has genuinely, literally been canceled for his political beliefs, but I think, unfortunately, he's taken that anger and resentment that he has because of that very real cancellation, which was over political beliefs, and is now kind of going, on one hand, has this insightful foreign policy analysis, but is going down this reactionary territory on another angle as well. Yes, he has been going sicko mode. Yeah. And it's cool we have people like VJ. And I think that's why I just have so much respect for VJ, because exactly what I'm saying. You know that clip we've looked at like a couple months ago? Let me see if I can find it. I think I saved it. from that book launch. Yeah, I think it's this. Hold on a sec. I think this is one of the most important things I've ever heard, as like in terms of
the most important.
You know, how to be a socialist, how to be an internationalist, you know, how that should work. Hey, Lana, what's up? I've been so inspired by this, and being able to talk to VJ and get to know him a little bit has been a huge thrill for me. A huge professional, probably the thing I'm most proud of accomplishing in my career. Yeah, Aaron Good, I've seen him falling into the, because it's the RFK thing. RFK is saying true things about like the CIA and all kinds of issues, and then again mixing that with the anti-vax, like anti-big pharma stuff. You know, it's fucking depressing. Anyway, here's this clip from BJ. I've always thought this is just so fantastic.
The most important thing in politics, by the way, isn't having like the correct program. It's learning to be not an asshole. You know, learning to like be in your cell meeting and learning with other people and figuring out how to talk to each other and just being a decent person as you try to model decency in the world.
I mean, if someone could distill sort of like what I try to do in my political commentary or whatever the fuck it is that I do on here, that would be, I think, the best way of kind of explaining that. Like I'll talk about difficult subjects. I'll take controversial positions, but I will do it in a way that like is not alienating to people. And so many of these people that do support these more controversial views when it comes to imperialism, like Jimmy Dore, for example, are in fact assholes, or like any of the Haas, Jackson, Hinkle, the CIA guys. You know, they're huge assholes. They're incredibly alienating. It's not helpful. It is not helpful to anything. Provocative Rob, that's what they call me. That's right. I could look at this. I could look at this Norm Finkelstein thing. Let's hear this, okay? We talked about Norman's sort of reactionary, cranky tendencies that he has, but as we've been saying, he has been going sicko mode on this. I keep doing this title and it's so stupid. It's so stupid. How can I be taken seriously with this? Yeah, I know he's all into the left-wing cancel culture nonsense. And that's a really sad thing. Like I said, Norman Finkelstein was genuinely canceled for his political beliefs. And he's taken that very real anger and frustration, which is justified, I think, but he's taking it out on all the wrong fucking people, talking about gender and on shit that he has no fucking understanding of. And then, of course, taking his correct ideas about Israel, about Ukraine, and then making them completely unpalatable for anyone else. So let's hear this argument from Norm Finkelstein, and we'll try and spot the lies, okay? We'll try and spot the lies. Why are my subtitles in French? That would be silly. Dmitry Leskaris has referenced this interview as changing his perspective on Ukraine. I would like to have Dmitry on this show as well. I did reach out to him, but through his website. I don't know if it worked. I do think he's been hanging out with some LaRouchites recently. That's troubling. Maybe we can talk to Dmitry on this program and get him on the right track. It's like the same fucking thing every time. When you don't have the theory, you know, when you don't have the theory, you get funneled down into some nonsense. You get funneled down into reactionary nonsense, supporting the LaRouchites, getting in fucking the weird anti-vax movement or the anti-trans movement. When you don't have the theory, you can't fucking analyze these things properly. The baby talk nonsense, Lana, that you get into when you don't have marks. Exactly. Anyway, let's hear this argument from Norm Finkelstein, and we'll try to spot the lies, okay? Let's try to find the lies. Why is this fucking LaRouchite stuff so big all of a sudden? Because they say things that are true. They say things that are true about China. They say things that are true about Russia and Ukraine. And because these viewpoints are not articulated on, and they have funding as well. By who? That's a good question. And they articulate viewpoints that you do not find on mainstream media. And people that watch mainstream media, a lot of people understand that it is propaganda and they are being lied to. And when you understand you're being lied to, you look around for people telling the truth. And that's when LaRouchites and these other reactionaries pull you in, or the Tucker Carlsons of the world. You know? They pull you in because they say things that you know are true, and they acknowledge the ways that you're being lied to, which makes you trust them. And then they bring you down this path of reaction. Yeah, they say things that are true, but in a wrong way. Yeah, and without the theoretical grounding. Let's hear this argument from Norm Finkelstein about this.
Maybe do you see between the kind of the Israeli occupation of, Palestine, and the way some people handle some of the more kind of like reactionary and right-wing elements in the Palestinian defense and opposition, versus how some of the left is talking about the Ukraine defense and like the Azov battalion? Do you think there's a comparison, or, whatever? And I'll just leave the question at that. Thanks.
Well, I have to ask Brianna's permission to go in a digression.
Absolutely.
Okay. On the question of the Ukraine, the thing that's troubled me about the public conversation of the Ukraine, or hysteria, it's not even a conversation, it's a hysteria, about the Ukraine, is the following. Those who are not totally immersed in the mainstream propaganda, some of the people you've had on your program.
Great quality on there.
And people who are not
old men and leftist audio
left.
aesthetics.
They have no particular left-wing allegiance. John Mearsheimer at University of Chicago, before he passed away, because Steve Cohn predicted that if you keep up with this NATO expansion in the Ukraine,
they know the history about National Socialism. That's exactly what they're doing. In other words, all the social chauvinists are now Marxists. Don't laugh.
There's going to be a war here. He said in A Democracy Now! In 2014, he was right. And other people, Professor Chomsky, I would include in that group, several others, they'll all say the following thing. Number one, the Russians were promised that there wouldn't be a NATO expansion in the East. That was the quid pro quo for the reunification of Germany after the decomposition of the Soviet Union. The Russians were promised that. The West then went ahead. We're talking about in the 1990s, the promises were given. The West then went ahead, started to expand NATO once, as John Mearsheimer likes to put it. There was the first tranche, then the second tranche of expansion. Then NATO starts expanding in Georgia and in the Ukraine. The Soviet Union says it's a red line to stop this. The Soviet Union offers a perfectly reasonable resolution: just neutralize Ukraine like we neutralized Austria after World War II. neither aligned with an Eastern Bloc or aligned with a Western Bloc. That seemed to me perfectly reasonable. And the people I mentioned, Mearsheimer, Cohn passed away since, but Professor Chomsky.
And also worth pointing out as well, when you talk about the neutrality of Ukraine, as has been talked about before as well, this whole idea that, NATO knew that Ukraine wasn't going to be joining. Like, they knew for a number of reasons, partially because of how fucking corrupt it was. And they were privately being told by NATO officials, no, you're not going to join NATO. Well, why weren't they saying that publicly? If Ukraine was never going to be part of NATO, why didn't they just say in like 2014, after this peaceful democratic transition, why didn't they just say then, Ukraine will not be a part of NATO? That's what they were saying to Ukraine. Why didn't they just say that publicly? Why did they want Russia to think that that was still a possibility while they were, again, pumping arms into the country and arming and training these neo-Nazi groups? That's an important question that no one I've not heard anyone have put forth a satisfactory answer to.
And a number of others, they'll all agree on the reasonableness of Putin's demands. And then the reasonableness of those demands have to, as Brianna says in her paper, and as she said this evening, they have to always be seen in context. So what's the context? The context is the Soviet Union, the former Russia, it lost, the estimates are, about 30 million people during World War II. United States, which if you watch an American movie, you would think the US won World War II, it lost about 200,000 people. The UK was the second candidate for winning World War II. They lost about 400,000 people. The Soviet Union lost 30 million people. Even though,
and you still it's a really truly amazing that you still have people suggesting that like the Soviet Union had this alliance, that constant fixation on the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the Soviet Nazi alliance, and those 30 million deaths just mean nothing to those folks. Those 30 million people that died defeating fascism, defeating the Nazis, saving the world, in fact, from the evils of Nazism. And people just hand wave that away. Oh yeah. 20 million people were killed in this conflict, but the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, though, what about that? And how many of those Red Army soldiers as well were from Ukraine? The heroes from Ukraine who joined the Red Army to defeat fascism, whose memories are being fucking pissed on today by the reemergence and the upholding of these like Banderite fucking fascist genocidal maniacs, pissing on the legacy of these fucking heroes, these Ukrainian heroes that fought against fascism. You know, that's just sickening.
Those who didn't take courses in the hard sciences can reckon the difference between several hundred thousand and
seriously,
30 million. Now,
anti-communism, it just melts people's brains.
Memory for the Russians. I remember Steve Cohen saying, when I grew up in Middle America, he was from Kentucky. He said we used to celebrate. I forgot what was called here. Victory
there were a lot
Day,
of Ukrainians in the Red Army, including the Jewish
said,
grandfather of my co-host girlfriend. It's something like 4 or 5 million people. It's not a small number. It's genuinely sickening. Like I saw in the Discord server, in the Russia-Ukraine channel. Let me see if I can find it. It's from a couple days ago. Sorry, excuse me. Like, this is just awful. to interrupt this clip. The Ukrainians have taken down another monument glorifying the Soviet Red Army, this time in the village of Berehove in the Lviv region. Full decommunization is underway. Like, this makes me fucking want to be sick. Taking down these monuments to the Red Army that fucking defeat with Ukrainians. Like, the idea that the Red Army was this occupying army that was doing Russian imperialism against Ukraine. Completely fucking backwards, ahistorical nonsense. You know? And again, Ukrainian heroes bravely fought in the Red Army to defeat fascism, and this is what their fucking deaths meant, you know? That's what that legacy is. And then you have these fucking NAFO losers in the West who have never done anything in their goddamn lives clapping and supporting this and saying like, oh, Russian tears, drinking from my cup of Russian tears over this. You know, it genuinely makes me fucking sick. Replacing Lenin with a Darth Vader statue. Yeah, fucking great. Who, as Putin, how as anti-communist dipshit Putin pointed out in the run-up to the invasion, Lenin, who fucking is one of the primary architects of this like Ukrainian statehood and Ukrainian nationalism, and suggesting, oh, you know, we're going to take down our statues of Lenin. Fucking unbelievable. Sickening people. I'm sorry, if you're supporting this narrative about the Red Army, that's explicitly supporting fascism. If you're promoting this narrative about the Red Army and the decommunization of Ukraine and all this shit, that's literally and explicitly supporting fascism. And again, replacing these like Ukrainian Soviet heroes with genocide committers and anti-Semites, these Banderites and these Ukrainian nationalists. It's fucking grotesque.
No, now as adults,
Let's hear
we
more
don't
from
celebrate
Norm.
that
Yeah.
anymore in the United States. Victory in World War II. He said, but Russia, he said, they still celebrate VE Day. They still celebrate it. I live in the Coney Island section of Brooklyn. A large part is Russian Jews. A large part is Russian Jews. You go out in May, it's May, you go out on VE Day, and the Russians, the 80 and 90-year-olds, they're wearing medals. They're medals from World War II. That memory is alive. And now there's this Ukraine where Nazis are playing an outsized role. I'm not saying they're a majority, but in the political and military life, they play an outsized, disproportionate, let's call it, role. This Ukraine, where Nazis are playing an outsized role, are aligned with a formidable military bloc called NATO. NATO keeps advancing and advancing.
Yeah, I did see that human person. Really spelling it out for everyone. The denazification,
Russia,
never. Really spelling it out.
It.
Let's keep sticking our fingers in our ears about this, though.
Beginning around 2016 under Trump, begins to arm the Ukraine, pouring in weapons.
Again, this is not Kremlin conspiracy.
Exercises.
This is not Kremlin propaganda.
With NATO.
This is well documented.
Very provocatively. And then
why is nobody covering it, human person? Because we support this. We support this whole process.
We've reached the boiling point. Now, everything I just told you Professor Chomsky, John Mearsheimer, and others will acknowledge. The mainstream press won't even acknowledge that. But people who call themselves
Norm Finkelstein on this subject is indeed going sicko mode.
Although
Yes, freelance
Mearsheimer wouldn't call
communist.
himself a dissident, he just calls himself a realist. Nice guy. I consider him a friend. I like him. They'll acknowledge all that. But then they say the invasion was criminal. Criminal invasion, criminal. And my question, which I've constantly been putting in correspondence, is a very simple one. If you agree that for more than 20 years, more than 2 decades, Russia has tried to engage in diplomacy. If you agree that the Russian demand neutralize Ukraine, not occupy it, not internally determine its government, its form of economy.
I'm not hearing any lies.
Neutralize it like Austria after World War II. If you agree that was a legitimate demand, if you agree that the West was expanding NATO, if you agree that Ukraine de facto had become a member of NATO, weapons pouring in, engaging in military exercises in NATO, and if you agree, Russia lost 30 million people during World War II because of the Nazi invasion. So there's a legitimate concern by Russia when all of these, if you excuse my language, fucking Nazis are floating around in the Ukraine.
You mean you mean Russia? Here's what Norm Finkelstein is arguing. This Kremlin propaganda. Russia, who lost 30 million or 20 million people fighting the Nazis. You can round up, it's more than 20 million. It's 20 million Chinese were lost in World War II. 27 million Russians, let's call it 30, who lost 30 million people fighting the Nazis, who consider NATO, which has always been, unless you're fucking completely brain melted by Western imperialist propaganda, has always been an anti-Russian alliance. You see this anti-Russian military alliance being funded and armed by the foremost military power in the world, arming and funding neo-Nazis to fight a civil war directly on your border, converting Ukraine, a former ally, into a hostile state, losing, for example, in Crimea, your most important military base. You're saying to me that they viewed that as being a threat to their security and that they engaged in diplomacy for literal decades before this invasion happened? Is that what, that's this Kremlin propaganda that Norm Finkelstein is spewing? Wow. Suggesting that they viewed that as being a threat to their security. That's really the only argument I've been making for the last year and a half about this. Since we've been talking about this. That's the basic argument that I've been making that makes so many people uncomfortable. That they viewed this as being a genuine threat to their security. And I genuinely find I have a hard time understanding why people can't wrap their minds around this idea. But Putin bad, though. Okay, yeah, I agree. But you can still acknowledge that while also acknowledging that Russia views this NATO proxy war directly on their border as being a threat to their security. The brightest of bright red lines is Mearsheimer's language. They were not shy about saying this. They were not shy about saying, we consider this a threat. This is the red line. Just as China right now is saying, we're not going to lose Taiwan. We're not going to allow that to happen. They're being very clear about this. And we continue pushing right up against and over that red line, and then we throw up our hands in shock and surprise when there's a consequence. This is what I have a hard time with. And I think it's a really interesting, using Afghanistan as a really interesting analogy with this. When we talked about that whole thing by Evan Dyer, whoever the fuck, CBC state propagandist Evan Dyer, saying like, you'd suggest the West is responsible for the Taliban. And it's like, yeah, of course you do. Of course we would. There was a progressive socialist government in Afghanistan, the PDPA, who was obviously unacceptable to us, that they were instituting this program of land reform, women's rights, literacy. So we started arming and funding these reactionaries to fight a civil war against them in Afghanistan. And then when the PDPA asked for the Soviets to come help them, and Russia invaded, and were indeed very violent in this invasion. I don't think anyone would deny that. And then what did we do? What did these very same people do in the 1980s? They throw up their hands and say, look at this Russian invasion of Afghanistan. Look at this the Russian mind, you see, they only understand this kind of violence and conquest. It's very disappointing, How could you support Russia's invasion? It's awful. Awful people. It's literally the exact same kind of situation. They literally admitted that they were trying to give Russia their own Vietnam, and they said the same thing about Ukraine, like in the early days of this, making that very same analogy. And people still have a hard time figuring out what's going on here, or suggesting that anything like what I'm saying is some kind of Kremlin propaganda, and therefore illegitimate, while not actually acknowledging any of the reality of it.
Then the simple question is, what was Russia to do? I'm not saying I agree with the invasion.
This is exactly what we've been asking, right? That's the question. Someone answer this question. Someone please, if you're part of this pro-Ukraine thing or the Kremlin propagandist thing, just answer this basic question. What are they supposed to do? What are they supposed to do? Someone come up with a satisfactory answer to that question. Because it seems like what a lot of these people think Russia should have done is just like sat back and said like, well, let's just allow all this to happen. Yeah, they'll give NATO our biggest military base. Yeah, why not? Let's let these NATO-sponsored groups continue to bomb and shell these Russian-speaking Ukrainian citizens. Let's let them march right up to their borders and aim nukes directly at our country. I guess we'll just have to take it. I noticed that the 9/11 documentary on HBO that goes over the history of Afghanistan mentioned virtually nothing about the socialist government or parties in Afghanistan. Yeah, again, it's like you have this thing. It's like, of course we needed to invade Afghanistan because of these like extreme reactionary religious fanatics that are in charge of the country, and then completely refusing to acknowledge the fact that the Soviets supported a government that, again, was promoting land reform, secularism, women's rights, literacy. We armed and funded a reactionary group to ensure that those things were never acted upon. And then you say, well, look at these barbarians that are in charge of Afghanistan. We got to invade now. Yeah, this is never mentioned. An independent economy that could refine oil and minerals. Well, and they'll say like they were violent, and the Russians were violent when they were invaded. Yeah, they were. I mean, they were fighting a war. It was violent. I don't think there's any denying that. But part of the reason this violence was happening was because we were arming and funding people to engage in violence, just like we did in Libya, just like we did in Syria, just like we did in Ukraine, just like we did in El Salvador, just like we did in Vietnam. Is it Kremlin propaganda to point out these basic historical parallels of our own documented actions? Apparently, for some people it is.
I'm not saying it went right, but I think one thing the invasion showed, you know what the one thing the invasion showed, Brianna?
What's that?
Russia's kind of weak militarily.
Yeah.
Which is why, all the more, they may have been fearful of a NATO-backed Ukraine filled with Nazis and probably at some point positioning nuclear missiles on its border. And I think 30 million people, listen to this, I think 30 million people is 30 million arguments in favor of Russia. Now, I'm not going to say, because I'm not a general and I'm not a diplomat, so I'm not a military strategist. So I'm not going to say it was the wisest thing to do. I'm not going to say it was the most prudent thing to do. But I will say, and I'm not afraid to say it, because it would dishonor the memory of my parents if I didn't say they had the right to do it. And I'm not taking that back. They had the right to do it. They had, if I can call it, the historic right to do it. 30 million people, and now you're starting again? You're starting again? No. You know.
It does make the wokeness comments hurt more. I agree. Like I like hearing Norm Finkelstein talk about this. I love hearing him talk about Israel-Palestine, and it's all the more reason why it's depressing that he's taking this very, like I was saying, this justified anger that he has about his own experiences and channeling it into this like reactionary direction. I think that's really shitty. But I appreciate this analysis, and I appreciate especially when he talks about Israel-Palestine as well.
I can't go for it. I can't go for those who acknowledge the legitimacy of the arguments made by Putin, but then call the invasion criminal. I don't see that. Now, you could say the way they executed it may have had criminal elements.
And this is important to point out as well. We can talk about, you know, our slightly more sympathetic viewpoint of Russia's stance on this. We can talk about all these historical trends and stuff like that. Worth acknowledging, though, that in whatever high-minded ideals you have to justify an invasion, in a war, horrible crimes are committed, regardless of whatever like moral argument you want to make. And we shouldn't lose sight of that. And I have not lost sight of that. I hope you haven't lost sight of it as well. You know, civilians are killed, no matter how, whatever justification you want to have, or if you want to make these arguments, horrible crimes are committed. Civilians are killed. Women are raped. This is in every single war, no matter what the fucking justification is for it. I still think it's really important to have this argument, though, and to present this viewpoint. But that's why I've never wanted to go down this path of like Russian chauvinism, which a lot of like of these like dumbass anti-imperialist quote unquote guys have. It's unfortunate that he's being regressive in this way also because the Nazis historically targeted trans people. For sure, yeah. Someone should point that out to him. Again, I didn't listen to the Chapo episode or whatever about this, but I think someone should probably make that argument to him.
We simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account.
Slava, Slava, Slava.
Thank you, Matt, for the 200 Fred coin. Thank you.
Law school, I don't know if you study the laws of war, but the laws of war make a very big distinction between jus in bellum and jus in bello, namely whether the launching of the war was legitimate or whether it was an act of aggression versus the way you conduct the war, jus in bello. And maybe the conduct, targeting of civilians and so forth, that probably violates the laws of war. But that's a separate issue under law.
And that's also been going on the other side
did they
as
have
well.
The right
before the invasion happened.
I think they did.
To be clear, it's not one side that's been engaging in terrible crimes.
I'm not going to...
the crimes were already being committed. I think it's important
these are,
to acknowledge that as well.
For me, even at my right age, These are acts of deference to the suffering of my parents. My parents felt a very deep love for the Russian people because they felt the Russian people understood war. They understood what my parents went through during World War II. So there was a very deep affection. My father, even at the end of his life, he learned fluent Russian. Because the neighborhood is all Russian, and Polish to Russian is not a huge leap. But also, he liked the Russian people.
And I do too, frankly.
In my family growing up, the worst there were two curses. Curse number one was parasite. You had to work. My parents had a very work ethic I could have lived without, believe me. The idea of pleasure didn't exist in my house. You had to work. And the second curse, the second epithet was traitor, a traitor. And I know my parents would regard me as a traitor if I denounced what the Russians were doing now. How they're doing it, as they say, probably there are violations and maybe egregious violations of the laws of war.
This is pretty fucking reasonable, honestly.
But they're right to protect their homeland.
Seriously, like it's really amazing, I think, how off the rails this conversation or this narrative has gotten, that this analysis, which I think is pretty fucking nuanced and not unreasonable, is framed as being so outrageous, I think that's like a sign of how fucking crazy this has gotten. He's acknowledging the fact that, like, horrible things have happened in the invasion. He's not making this moral argument that Russia's right to do whatever they're doing. Just acknowledging basic historical facts. It's wild to me how this analysis now in our climate, our political climate, has been lumped into this category of being this crazy, radical, extremist Kremlin propaganda kind of thing, I think that's very troubling.
From this juggernaut, this relentless pressing on their throats, when there was such an easy way to resolve it. If you read War and Peace, and I suspect you did because you're quite a gifted writer, obvious. You were a reader growing up.
I confess, there's a copy on my shelf that I've started many times, but I've never finished it.
I'm surprised. It's unbelievable. It's really obviously it's in the class. So, in any case, War and Peace is about the invasion of Russia in the War of 1812, and Tolstoy, the centerpiece of War and Peace, is the great battle of Borodino, and he describes it in this kind of terrifying detail. The Battle of Borodino, and the Battle of Borodino. 25,000 Russians were killed, or maybe it was altogether 25,000. I can't remember. I think it was 25,000 Russians were killed. Why do I mention it? So for Russians, the seminal event of the 19th century was the War of 1812 and the invasion of Russia. For the 20th century, it's World War II. And just in the Battle of Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, just Leningrad, 1 million Russians were killed.
It's fucking staggering.
There was cannibalism. This is serious. World War II for the Russians.
Can I ask you?
And you want me to just forget about that? Oh, that's just a trivial fact? Trivial fact? No. Now you ask yourself, in all the coverage that you've heard about No,
Get rid of those
Russian
Red Army
attack
statues.
on
The
Ukraine.
occupying Red Army
All the coverage
statues.
you've read, you've
Drink my
listened
cup
to.
of Russian tears. Like,
How
fuck
many
off.
times have you heard that 30 million Russians were killed during World War II?
It's
How many times?
very infrequently. It's never stated in this context, and very infrequently stated, even
Absolutely
in a
never.
history class, an American history class. Mm-hmm.
And then Steve Cohn, he was my professor at Princeton, and for a while he was my advisor. I didn't know him well, and at the end we had a falling out over my whole dissertation catastrophe debacle. But Cohn had a genuine affection for the Russian people. He did. He loved the Russians. He loved the Russian people. And so when he begins his presentation, there's a YouTube of him debating the former U.S. ambassador, McCall, I think was his name, or McMahon. How does he begin? He begins with how Russians remember the E-Day. That's the starting point for me. It's the starting point. Now, you might say, well, doesn't your whole argument then justify what Israel does because of what happened to Jews during World War II? It's an interesting question. Because the most moving speech in support of the founding of the State of Israel, by far the most moving speech, you know who it was given by? At the UN. It was given by the Russian Foreign Minister Gromyko.
Oh, you wrote about this.
Yeah.
I pulled this clip as well. Mm-hmm.
And he said it was another act of generosity. Remember I mentioned to you earlier Du Bois's act of generosity, where he looks past what Treichka says about black people? And as a student, I thought it was a very generous act. So now the Russians lost 30 million people in World War II, but Gromyko says the suffering of the Jews, it was different. It was horrible. Here's a Russian saying that. And he said, if a binational state is not possible, they earn their right to a state. So I say, I apply the same standard. Now, the way Israel carried out its right to establish a state by expelling the indigenous population, appropriating their land, and creating havoc and misery for generation after generation, decade after decade. No, I'm not going there. But yes, I do believe in recent correspondence with some friends, I used the expression, I think Russia has the historic right to protect itself. Not by violating somebody else's right to self-determination, but neutralization, I think that's legitimate.
So I want to ask you this because, it wouldn't be right for me to put this question to Ro Khanna and not put this question to you. Mm-hmm. You are speaking so compellingly about the kind of moral valences of who's entitled to feeling insecure as a nation, who's entitled because of the historical costs it has paid to defend itself and to defend whatever you want to call it, democracy in fascism, all of these kinds of words, has paid in terms of the number of human lives and kind of an unmatched price. And I think that's...
Well, the Chinese lost about 26 million to the Japanese.
Right.
So it was close.
It's fucking
close,
staggering.
but still.
Another thing that's conveniently forgotten.
Just Herculean totals. Okay.
Sure.
And yet, when I was talking to Ro Khanna, and he was saying, well, ultimately, he's arguing on the other side that America's 100% in the right, Russia's 100% in the wrong, and this is a just war. Regardless of the substance, I would still push him on this idea of, even if you believe it to be just kind of morally, the act, I'm going to have to, as a leftist, push back against the idea that the preemptiveness of the war is okay, and that war as a solution is something that we should be tacitly or implicitly condoning. And I wonder what you make of that question. I mean,
look, Brianna,
yeah,
not to flatter you, but you always ask the right questions. And that's why I was careful in what I said. You referred to the preemptiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Moss.
They tried for 22 years. That's giving a lot of time to diplomacy. But 22 years is a lot of time.
But isn't that the same kind of...
And then the question is, at what point does Russia get to act? When there are nuclear tipped
This is the hard question.
missiles,
People don't want to grapple with this.
Is that when it gets to act? I don't agree with that. I think, of course,
I know it makes
you
people
have
uncomfortable.
To give maximum time to see if diplomacy is going to work. Absolutely.
And then you start fighting, and then you send in troops. Because Norm, this is right. Whether or not you believe, how do you distinguish?
I'm very happy to take to heart your question, and that leads me again with the same question that I returned to you, and I've returned to all of my correspondents over the past 6 weeks. If it's clear that all the negotiations are in bad faith,
like the Minsk agreements as well, like
clear
they were negotiating, they were engaging in diplomacy,
had become de facto a member of NATO, what was Russia supposed to do? You say, don't send in troops. Fine.
That's the eternal question.
I come from a family that was completely anti-war. My mother used to say, better 100 years of evolution than 1 year of revolution. She had enough of war. Okay?
But what I'm asking you is a little bit different.
I have no problem with you recoiling at the prospect.
I'm not even saying that. I'm not even saying.
And then I say, what was Russia supposed to do?
What I'm asking is how you distinguish between your feelings that this is a moral war, this is a justified act, fine, and someone like Ro Khanna's belief that U.S. intervention, continued support of NATO Western powers, sending weapons into Ukraine, arming the Azov battalion, is, as he puts it, a just war. The fact that you are both making these arguments, regardless of... Wait a minute. I'm not making an equivalent between the value of your arguments, but obviously Ro thinks what he thinks, and my point to him was you using vague terms like just war is exactly what's allowed the kind of jingoistic parade to lead us into so many other incursions. So how principally do you distinguish? I understand your feeling, and I understand the historical citations and the loss of life that leads you to the conclusions that you've been led to, but someone on the other side will say the same thing. Someone else will say, well, Marshall, this is how many Ukrainians have suffered, and this is da-da-da-da.
I have respect for Bree, honestly. Like, Bree is someone that, like, probably could have taken that platform that she developed under Bernie and transitioned that into doing, like, a Russia bad MSNBC gig. And, she's doing her own thing. I don't agree with her a lot of the time. But, she's doing something. She's hosting Norm and allowing Norm the space and the time to articulate this, like, what is framed in our media as being this, like, dangerous radical viewpoint. So, I respect that. I don't always respect her. I don't always agree with her ideas, but, like, she could have translated all this stuff into a mainstream gig, like Simone Sanders or someone, or advising some other ghoulish progressive congressperson, but she's not doing that, Yeah, I think that would be my take as well, Sam. Yeah, sometimes she says things that I'm kind of like, okay, and I don't agree with it, but mixed bag. I think a mixed bag is a good way of saying that. Yeah, I would take Bree over, like, a lot of, or the vast majority of, sort of mainstream progressive commentary, warts and all, 99 times out of 100. Yeah, I agree with that, Lana, as well.
May use that word. You're canceling the context. You see, I began my whole discussion with you not with the position of Biden or the position of lunatics like Judy Woodruff, and PBS. I said my quarrel is with people on the left who agree with all of my context, but then make the leap and say it's a criminal invasion. And I say to Professor Mearsheimer, Professor Chomsky, and many others who acknowledge everything I just said, I say, then if you agree with everything I said, what was Putin supposed to do? I don't see what he was supposed to do. I'm lost. It's an impasse. I don't see what...
Well, you were making a reference earlier to laws of war and rules of war. I don't...
Jus ad bellum and jus in bellum.
I don't know. I'm not, I never studied the laws of war, and I don't know what the rules are. But it does seem to me that a line is drawn between, and I know that people are going to say something can be constructively war, and, but in terms of an actual invasion and boots on the ground or missiles dropped or things like that, that the thing that Russia has to do, even if it disadvantages them strategically in some ways, is to wait until the other person hits first. In an explicit way.
I don't agree with them. I would say, as in any case, you have.
I guess that's the sort of like evil of the NATO strategy. This whole idea of wait for them to hit first, but it's always been that way of just like pushing and pushing up against those red lines without throwing that first punch until a reaction is provoked, right? That seems to be the strategy. And then they can always throw their hands up and say, oh, look at this invasion. It was the same thing with North Korea, right? It was the same thing with the Korean War. Yeah, this is the strategy. Pushing right up past those red lines over and over and over again. Yeah, it's the backseat, the little brother in the backseat not touching you approach. That's exactly what it was. And then they don't throw the first punch. They're too cowardly for that. They arm proxies to fight these conflicts. They push past these red lines and they push past them over and over and over again, and they dare whoever is their victim or their target to respond. And then when they respond, they use that response to justify even further aggression and further hostility. So that's why that doesn't really work. This I just wait for them to hit first. That's not how they operate. That's not how they operate. They provoke these conflicts very deliberately. It's literally a well-established part of their playbook, for sure. This goes back to what I was saying before. It's like there's no excuse not to know about this stuff, this history.
Demonstrate its last resort, and therefore you do have to demonstrate.
So how do you do that? Because that is the question. How do you make sure that this is not just the same kind of pretext that leads us to so many illegal wars?
Listen, I'm going to give you a historical analogy, probably the details of which you're unfamiliar with, but just allow me to just sketch it out.
Sure.
So in 1967, Israel launches a war. It occupies the West Bank, Gaza, Syrian Golan Heights, and then it occupies this huge area, the Egyptian Sinai. And after the 67 war, about 3 years later, when Anwar Sadat comes into power, he says, I'm willing to sign a peace treaty with Israel, but they have to return the territory they acquired during the 67 war, because that's the law. The law is, it's under international law, it's inadmissible to acquire territory by war. Israel acquired the territory during the June 67 war. No territory belongs to Egypt. Israel says, no, we're not leaving the Sinai. Sadat says, look, I'm offering you a peace treaty. I'm offering you peace. Just return what's not yours, the Egyptian Sinai. Israel says no. Then Israel starts creating facts in the ground in the Sinai. It starts building settlements, those same settlements you're familiar with from the West Bank. And then it announces in 1972 it's going to build, quote, the all-Jewish city of Carmel. Egypt says, you're not going to do that. You're crossing a red line. Egypt says, if you don't stop this, we're going to attack. We're going to attack. Everybody ignores Egypt because Egypt.
I think this is a good point, Lam Fada. People just ignore the USSR and Russia and Belarus, as people were pointing out as well, talking about that film Come and See, which takes place there. Ignore the USSR and Russia as its successor states' deep psychological wounds due to World War II. They play up theirs, though. Although I don't think it's enough to justify an invasion, it's a reason they might strike first if they see open Nazis in the army of Ukraine. Open Nazis in the army of Ukraine, funded by NATO, an anti-Russian alliance, which was originally led by Nazis. Yes, I think it's safe to say that they viewed that as being a threat to them. When Ukrainian Nazis are being armed and funded and trained by NATO, an anti-Russian alliance, which was founded initially and run by former Nazis. You know? And it's wrong to suggest that they viewed that as being a threat. This is where I disagree with probably 99% of the analysis that we read about this, or we hear about here on good old twitch.tv. Yeah, and that's right. Even if they aren't existing socialist states anymore, the justification they have is certainly valid. Yeah, those traumatic psychological wounds haven't healed just because they, at the behest of the West, were forced to give up on socialism. And I think that's probably a possibility as well. Is there more or fewer Nazis in Ukraine now than there was a year and a half ago? I guess the invasion has created more than it's killed. And then I think that's one of the arguments that I think we need to be having as well about the invasion. Has it helped NATO? Has it helped this Ukrainian Nazi movement who have been getting an unlimited supply of arms and funding from these very people still? I think that's a good question. Although you can also make the argument that the invasion has shown NATO to be a paper tiger and has accelerated this collapse of unipolar Western capitalist hegemony and this de-dollarization process. I think you could also make that argument as well.
Arabs don't know how to fight wars. The Arabs were nicknamed after 67. The term of abuse for an Arab was they were monkeys. They called them monkeys. They don't know how to fight wars. Okay? And then come October 1973, guess what? Sadat attacks. And the Israelis were so shocked, they thought the whole thing was over. They called it Moshe Dayan,
Thank you,
the
Echoes.
defense minister at the time, or the fire
I'm always glad to hear that.
I think defense minister at the time.
Again, that's what we try to do on this stream, is carve out a space where we can have these discussions, but in like a normal, chill way, and not a fucked up, hostile, depressing way. You know? And I don't know that there's anyone out there on Twitch that's having these same arguments in this way, frankly. If I could toot my own horn a little bit here. And I'll toot chat's horn as well. I'll toot your horn all day long, chat. I'll tell you that much.
He says, he made this panicky phone call. He said, it's the end of the third temple. This is it. We're finished. Well, it wasn't the end of the third temple, but it was a significant, heavy loss to Israel. They lost between 2,000 and 3,000 soldiers, which is the largest number except for the war in 1948. Now, here's the point. The point is, no country in the world, none, including the United States, no country in the world condemned Sadat for aggression. None. And, you know, for Israel, it was a close call, or it seemed to be. In retrospect, it turned out not to be. But it seemed to be a close call. Nobody condemned Egypt. Why?
The U.S. defense contractors exerted full dominance over Europe, got them to remilitarize, shoot their own economies in the foot, justified more of our own spending. Most U.S. foreign policy only makes sense if you consider corporate interest over national interests. I mean, as we've talked about before a lot, like a big part of this, right, has been getting Western Europe off of cheap Russian gas and having fracked gas from the U.S. take its place, which has a higher environmental cost and a higher cost to transport and is more expensive, but benefits United States-based energy companies.
Its demand was legitimate. Return to Sinai, it's not yours, it's our
Export
territory.
Of capital, imperialism
Number
101.
two,
But I thought imperialism 101 was when one country invades another country. I'm confused. That's what I thought. That's why, like everyone else on Twitch, I support NATO arming these Nazis in the name of anti-imperialism. That was an amazing take from that Comrade Shinji guy the other day, where he points out the Ukrainian Nazi problem so he can get likes on Twitter. And in the same sentence is like, I support Ukraine on anti-imperialist grounds, but look at all these Nazis. So you support Ukraine on, this is nonsensical. This is a completely incoherent viewpoint. I support Ukraine on anti-imperialist grounds while acknowledging that there is this Nazi problem in Ukraine and suggesting that despite this Nazi problem, NATO must continue arming and funding these very people that I'm pointing out, for likes on Twitter. The incoherent, completely incoherent position. That guy does fucking suck. He walks this line between suggesting that he supports or he's against imperialism while time and time again supporting the very imperialists that he claims to be against. Comrade Sinji sent a silly tweet. You hate to see it. Yeah. Like, I just don't believe any of these people vocal about this position arrive at it intellectually. Well, that's the thing, but when you break it down like that, right, it just makes no sense. Ukraine's not beating the Nazi allegations or whatever as a joke to get a couple thousand likes on Twitter while being like, oh yeah, also I still support sending all these weapons to these Nazis though, by the way. Like, really? That's your position. That's completely fucking incoherent.
Negotiations for 6 years. And number three, as hard as he tried to negotiate,
this is some guy, Rob Russo, some leftist based in Canada. I was turned on to this sick individual, and I found this.
Hello, Majority Report Raiders. Hello, welcome in, Raiders. I'm happy to see you. Thank you for joining the stream today. Very happy to hear from each and every one of you. Please go ahead and smash the follow button if you can. I'm Rob. Hello, I'm just a normal dude. I'm just a normal guy. And I'm very happy to have you all join us today. Thank you for joining the stream. I appreciate the raid. Big fan of the Majority Report with Sam Sater. And I hope you all had a good stream today. Welcome in. We're actually just looking at this clip right now of Norman Finkelstein. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Giving his stance about Russia-Ukraine, I think talking to Bree Joy Gray, kind of getting into the historical analysis of that. Really interesting stuff. Really interesting stuff. I'm going to need the glasses plugged right now. I'm looking for a new pair. These are Christopher Clues. Christopher Clues actually sent me these glasses free of charge because I'm an important influencer. Christopher Clues sent me these glasses free of charge. Highly recommend them though. Very, very good. Ed Kamen Hush-Thersway. Thank you for the tier 1 sub. Thank you. You've just become an elite member of the Friendship Triangle. Oh my goodness. Plunger Man, thank you for the 5 gifted subs. Thank you for that. I appreciate that, Plunger Man. Thank you. Clavicinist. I didn't listen to the Chapo appearance. I think this clip has been quite interesting, though. I think, as I was saying before, my stance on this, I do think, as much as Norman Finkelstein, when it comes to Ukraine, has been framed as being some kind of like radical, I think his stance on this is of just basically acknowledging the sort of historical material reality of the conflict is pretty nuanced. Like he's not even really supporting the invasion. He's very clearly denouncing the crimes that have been committed, while also just acknowledging the basic reality about the ways that Russia viewed NATO's activities in eastern Ukraine as being a threat to their security. I think he's a bit of an apologist for Putin, but I agree that the U.S. pushed him into war. Well, I think that's I don't think I would say that he is an apologist for Putin. I think he's taken pains in this clip that we've been listening to not say the invasion is good and I think it was great and I love it and I support it. I think he's taken pains to not do that, while also acknowledging the sort of Russian viewpoint on this. And this is the one thing that I started this stream, I think, complaining about. Just the fact that, I think any kind of nuanced take on this that even acknowledges, Russia's perspective or is even remotely sympathetic to Russia's perspective has been lumped into this category of like Kremlin propaganda or this dangerous ideas that shouldn't be discussed. That I think is a little bit of a problem and has prevented a lot of nuanced discussion of this conflict. And this very one-sided kind of pro-NATO, pro-America viewpoint has really been the only one that's been promoted. And that's, I think, has been a big problem across the sort of media landscape and the independent media landscape. The last few things I've heard from him, I've been very put off, even ignoring his anti-trans stuff. Well, and that's another thing we talked about as well, where I think Norm Finkelstein is someone that can make a legitimate claim to being canceled for his political beliefs and has taken a lot of that legitimate anger, which I think is totally justified, and has started funneling it into these really unhelpful and reactionary directions, which I don't agree with. But I do think his stance on Ukraine is really important to, even if you don't agree, is important to listen to and try and like understand. I think he's articulating a perspective that we don't hear a lot in the West, and I think it's an important perspective that acknowledges a lot of like material realities that get completely ignored in our discussions on this. Anyway, let me just finish this clip. It's almost done.
Jewish city of Carmel.
Thanks again for the raid majority report, and thanks for joining us.
And then plans with Syria, the attack, which happens, they call it the Yom Kippur War, the October War in 1973. So now fast forward to Putin. The man was reasonable, neutralize Ukraine.
Here's like, I guess this is a good place to start, right? Let's listen to what Norm has to say here, and we can determine for ourselves whether we think this qualifies as being Putin apologia. And I think one thing that is acknowledged here, which again I think is ignored a lot, which is that Russia, and you don't have to like Russia or Putin to acknowledge this. You don't. Okay? I'm giving you permission. I'm giving you permission right now. You don't have to say Putin good in order to acknowledge this basic fact, which is that Russia did for many years engage in diplomacy before this all happened. And I think that's undeniable, with the Minsk agreements, it goes back decades. I don't think you can really deny that. So let's hear it. We can listen to this upcoming clip. This is ending the clip, and we can see if this qualifies as being Putin apologia.
Negotiates Over 20 years, they're fighting over this thing, this NATO expansion in the East. And then they start provoking them even more. They start pouring weapons into Ukraine.
Which again, this is not Kremlin propaganda to point this out. And I know some people, even people that I like and respect a lot, have gotten tripped up on this and think that, NATO only started arming Ukraine in 2022. But this is not accurate. That's just not. And that you don't have to be like a Putin stan or like a gray zone reader to acknowledge this basic fact. NATO didn't start arming Ukraine in 2022 when the invasion happened. This process was already going on, and there's plenty of mainstream reporting that's backs that up. There's even video of people, as I've talked about before, people like John McCain, Lindsey Graham, Amy Klobuchar going to hang out with these Ukrainian militias in 2016, and saying explicitly, "We will give you whatever you want, just fight the Russians." So suggesting that this is something that only began in the last year and a half is just outright false. It's just not accurate.
They start carrying on joint military exercises between Ukraine and NATO. And then all of these smarmy Nazis start to surface. No, I'm not saying Nazis control the government, but they played an outsized role in the government, in the military. And I don't see what's the difference between what Putin did and what Sadat did. I don't see the difference. So I think it was the same thing.
But Norm,
and nobody condemns Sadat for aggression. No one.
But I'm asking, I think, a different question. I'm really not interested in litigating any given case, mostly because I don't know what the hell any of these things are about. So, I don't really, I'm not going to sit here and say... I don't know the
history of science.
Right, I'm not going to sit here and say this war was just, and that's for other people to determine. What I do know is that everyone is making that argument on all kinds of sides, including people I know I don't disagree with. And so many wars have been started with the argument that it is a just war for X, Y, and Z reasons, and it's okay to act despite there not having been a direct act.
She really keeps pushing this point.
The allegedly aggrieved party.
Like she really just won't let go of this.
So all I'm asking is to give some thought to how one would articulate a standard that can't be so easily abused.
Because again, the war was already going on. I think that's the main thing. The invasion was a big escalation. There's no denying that. There's no denying that. And you can argue about the legality of that or whether it was justified or whatever. There's no denying it was a big escalation, which a lot of people, including me, didn't predict was going to happen. But there was already a conflict going on. NATO was already promoting one side of a conflict that was going on in eastern Ukraine at that time. Not dissimilar in any way to, supporting one side of a civil war in Libya in an effort to overthrow the Libyan government. Not dissimilar at all to supporting one side in the Syrian civil war in an effort to destabilize and overthrow the Syrian government. Or doing the same thing in Ukraine. Or doing the same thing in Afghanistan in the 80s, as I was talking about earlier. This is really a common strategy that's been going on for a long time. Dmitry Lascaris has been saying that the sentiment within Russia, he was just there, is that the Russian government should have acted sooner. Well, one of the things that I really remember as well from right before this invasion started, remember when Putin and Russia recognized these Eastern republics and said, okay, fine, they've been negotiating. There was the Minsk agreements, which were repeatedly violated by the West, as Angela Merkel openly admitted. Right? And the thing that I remember the most is when they first recognized those republics, and we watched some clips from RT, and I know it's RT, it's like Kremlin propaganda, but unfortunately no one in our mainstream media shows us this perspective, so I think it's quite important. But they were interviewing people, not like Russian proxies, but like the elderly civilians, people that live in these regions, about this. And the viewpoint that was most commonly articulated was like, what took so long here? What's the holdup? Why now? It's been 10 years of this. We looked back a couple weeks ago, last week, I think we were looking at a clip of CNN from 2014 showing the devastating civilian casualties that were going on in 2014 in this region. And it was 2022 that Russia recognized these republics. And when they went in and interviewed people that lived there, they were like, why, what's the holdup? Why did it take so long? It seems like that was a really common belief, not just from people in Russia, but from Russian-speaking Ukrainians in the East who had been getting shelled for the last 10 years, you know?
Brianna, I agree. It's like once you grow up in life, you discover that life is very little about principles.
Exactly. The Crimea thing is very similar.
It's mostly about judgment.
For people to say, like, we can't end the Ukrainian conflict, Russia still holds Crimea, but, like, fucking just send a camera and a guy with a microphone to Crimea and ask people what live there, ask them what they think about it. And you'll be surprised to learn that, like, many of these folks actually have no interest in being part of this, like, pro-NATO, pro-EU, pro-Western, anti-Russian Ukrainian nationalist project. They're not part of that. They don't want to be part of that. You know? I kind of ignore that, though, and we have these conversations.
Principles get you not very far. I remember I got this lesson from Professor Chomsky, as he always puts it in his very lucid, simple terms. He said to me once, Norman, we all know it's wrong to lie. But if a rapist knocks on your door and asks, is your daughter in the bedroom?
Okay, so familiar spirit, I want to get to this here. It says the annexation of Crimea in 2014 was the start and solidification of a long-term invasion strategy. Russia invades a country, then points at NATO and cries, you're threatening me. Yes, U.S. imperialism bad. Yes, Putin's pride is hurt, but these points are irrelevant in the context of the Ukrainian conflict. I would disagree with the old timeline there that you're promoting, because this didn't start with the invasion of Crimea. It started with the Euromaidan. And you can try and frame the Euromaidan movement as being this like organic grassroots democratic movement. The fact is, though, when you've got this organic democratic movement and like Hillary Clinton and John McCain and all these U.S. officials start showing up and supporting one side of the conflict, that I think gives me the impression, and probably gives other people around the world the impression, that the United States is deeply implicated in promoting one side of that conflict and installing a pro-EU, pro-NATO, pro-America, anti-Russian government. And then so you're Russia at that point. There's now this anti-Russian, pro-NATO government in place, and Crimea is the home to your most important military base, as well as many Russian-speaking people and ethnic Russians in a geographical area that historically has been part of Russia for many, many years. So I would disagree with that analysis that they just invaded Crimea as this opening inauguration to this long-term invasion strategy. I think when you take that mildly sympathetic viewpoint and you understand that perspective, I think it becomes a little bit more complicated than that. In my view. Yeah, and now Russia has built these big infrastructure projects there. And again, just like you can go and interview people in Crimea. Like CNN and other organizations have done this, and many of those folks that are being interviewed are quite happy with the current arrangement, actually, and have no interest or desire to be part of this, especially these ethnic Russian or Russian-speaking people have no interest in being part of this Ukrainian nationalist movement that is explicitly, fundamentally anti-Russian.
There's a clash of principles there, obviously. And so, at the end of the day, what is required is not the application of an abstract principle, but the faculty of judgment when principles clash. And then when principles clash and you have to exercise judgment, You then have to look at particulars, the specifics. And that's why, excuse me?
I appreciate that, which is probably why, this is the limit. This is the limit of it for me. And I'm happy to take more questions from people who I'm sure know much more about the particulars. Although your last...
Bree just can't quite get there. In all honesty, I thought, and we can, in the same way that I think liking or not liking Putin is kind of irrelevant to like trying to form an analysis of this, to the same thing, we can point out plenty of horrible things that Norman Finkelstein has said, his kind of reactionary tendencies that he's been veering towards over the last couple of years. Totally disagree with all that stuff. I think his statements about trans people, like people have pointed out, are fucking vile. But whether you like him personally or support every single thing he says personally, I think this actual viewpoint of the invasion of Ukraine is based in a sort of historical materialist understanding, and is pretty nuanced, and I don't think is just this like pro-Putin, pro-Russia thing. I really think it's pretty fucking reasonable, actually, in my opinion. Russia's invaded a sovereign country multiple times. Do you have examples of that you're referring to? And when it's not itself invading, it's supporting insurgent groups and trying to destabilize Ukraine. But familiar spirit, you can't deny that Western imperialism has supported insurgent groups in Eastern Ukraine and all around the world in an effort to destabilize enemies that they have. This is a common strategy, a strategy of Western imperialism, supporting insurgent groups in an effort to provoke conflicts, usually with Russia and with other countries that they don't like. No, I think what you're doing is whataboutism. I think you're in my opinion, okay? In my opinion, what I think you're doing is ignoring the role that Western imperialism plays in provoking these conflicts, and then saying, well, what about all this bad stuff Russia does? I think that's the actual whataboutism. I think if you live in the West, like I live in Canada, or if you live in America, if you live in the heart of the empire, I think it's always a very dangerous thing when we start ignoring the role that Western imperialism has played in these conflicts. I think that's a dangerous thing. You understand the idea of imperialism and, the way that if you live in the empire, we're the primary, by any stretch, the primary imperialist power around the world. And I think when we live in the empire and we ignore the role that the empire plays in Ukraine or any other big conflict, we're kind of doing a disservice, and we have an incorrect analysis, and it leads us to having what I view as kind of an incoherent viewpoint. I think you can when you ignore the role that the West plays in this or any other conflict, then you say, well, what about Russia? I mean, that to me is whataboutism. You're ignoring the primary engine of imperialism, and you're obfuscating that by pointing to, but Russia does this and that's bad, or whatever else. You can use a number of examples of this, but that to me is whataboutism, when you live in the empire and ignore the role that Western imperialism plays. I'm not ignoring Russia's role. The question is what should be done to resolve the conflict. Well, in my opinion, what should be done is the same thing that I've been advocating for the last year, which is there should be a ceasefire and some kind of negotiation. And unfortunately, in our climate, our political climate, the only course of action that's ever discussed is more money, more weapons to Ukraine, which just makes the conflict go on and on and on. And that to me helps nobody. It certainly doesn't help anybody in Ukraine, despite the fact that people can use them as sort of a justification for this. But, I don't agree with that though. I think this conflict should have been avoided in the first place by maybe just following the Minsk agreements, which Russia negotiated. The Minsk agreements, which recognized all these things, which was intentionally violated repeatedly. And so it should have been avoided in the first place by following these basic diplomatic agreements and discussions that were going on. But since it happened, unfortunately, there should be some kind of ceasefire or measured negotiation. In a ceasefire, the onus must be on one party. If neither are willing to agree, the onus should be on the party at fault, Russia. Well, I don't think anything that I'm saying is really getting through to you right now. Because again, I think you're ignoring the role, and I think this is a widespread issue here in the West. We're ignoring the role that NATO played in provoking the conflict, and saying it's 100% caused by Russian aggression and Russian imperialism, or whatever you want to say. I just don't think that's an accurate analysis of what has happened here. I don't. So I don't think, if that's your viewpoint, I don't think you're going to come to a really nuanced understanding of how to stop this conflict or what should happen. If your only analysis is Russia bad, then no. But then to me, the only solution then is, well, let's just turn this into an even more of a bloody quagmire. It's only gone on for a year and a half. People have suffered for a year and a half. Let's make it 2 years. Let's make it 3 years. Let's make it 5 years. Russia, whether you like them or not, they've repeatedly indicated over the years, we view this as being a red line. And NATO and the Western countries repeatedly pushed up against that red line over and over and over and over again until this invasion happened. And, if your view of that is just like, well, Russia's at fault, then I don't know. I don't think you can really come to a proper understanding of it. And you certainly can't come to a conclusion. Yeah, and I think what Carrier Wave is saying is, as much as people don't want to acknowledge this, and it makes them uncomfortable to acknowledge, Ukraine is not going to get Crimea or these eastern regions back. That ship has now sailed. And I think if you can just acknowledge that, as you should, because it's just, they're not giving it up. Like the stuff that now that they've spent a year and a half fighting a fucking war over this, they're not just going to give these regions back. It's not going to happen. So if you just acknowledge that, you can say, okay, well, there should be some kind of a negotiation or ceasefire or come to some conclusion. The only other thing is, let's continue pumping arms into Ukraine until we have World War III. These are the options here. So I am on the side, personally, as I've been for the last year and a half, saying there should be a ceasefire and a negotiation, and this should stop. And unfortunately, it's gone on for the last year and a half. People have suffered and died for the last year and a half, and ultimately it's the same fucking conclusion that it's coming to. If they do that measured negotiation now, it's going to be the same result as what it would have been in 3 weeks into this thing. And there's been an entire year and a half of horrific suffering for people that has gone on in the meantime. And that's just not something that I agree with. What? Can you play this video from Putin apologist, the NYT, from 9 years ago? Okay, let's check this out. Noted Kremlin propaganda outlet, the New York Times.
Watch this recent confrontation between Russian and Ukrainian troops closely. The Ukrainian troops are carrying two flags, one for Ukraine, but another with the Soviet symbolics. Why?
They're appealing to a kind of common legacy, and they wanted to present them with a symbol that the Russians wouldn't be firing at.
The history between Russia and Ukraine is a long and interconnected one. A brief refresher.
Rare Ukrainian W. Don't worry, now they're making sure that there's none of those symbols of the Red Army left, or no symbols of the long and I think amazing legacy of Ukrainian socialism, which is just being completely fucking pissed on now by these Ukrainian nationalists who support people like Bandera, who helped carry out the Holocaust. and completely, as I've been articulating before, but I'll say again, completely pisses on the legacy of the millions of Ukrainians that fought in the Red Army defeating fascism. You know, this is, I think, an incredible, amazing legacy that's being completely just like thrown in the toilet now, which I think is a real shame, a real crime.
Водружаются государственные флаги Украинской ССР и Российской Федерации, символ великой и вечной дружбы.
Well, Ukraine, like every other non-Russian republic within the Soviet Union, was the creation of the Russian, or if you prefer, the Soviet leadership in the 1920s and 1930s. These boundaries are drawn, and the attempt was to bring together within certain administrative units individuals who could be identified in terms of language, culture, and so on.
The geographic borders of Ukraine have remained mostly the same since they were defined by Soviet leaders. Back then, Ukraine was largely an agrarian society, but the Soviets built factory after factory in the east to serve Moscow, changing the Ukrainian economy in the process. Today, eastern Ukraine remains the country's industrial heartland. The Soviets also changed the population. In the 1920s, Crimea
Confirmed
was dominated
Putin lovers,
by
the New York
ethnic
Times,
Tatars,
of course.
but Joseph Stalin had other ideas.
And it's in 1943-44 that the entire Crimean Tatar population is removed from Crimea and sent off to Central Asia, primarily Uzbekistan. In their place come primarily Soviet Army veterans and their families, usually Russian. At that particular point in time, Crimea is becoming primarily Russian.
And Crimea would have stayed Russian if not for, legend has it, a drunken dinner party in 1954 when Nikita Khrushchev decided
Common
to give
Khrushchev
Crimea
L.
as a gift to Ukraine.
Готовился к празднику Крым, новая область Советской Украины.
By the end of the Soviet Union in 1991, Ukraine had been transformed. The east was connected to Moscow via a network of gas pipelines built in the 1960s and 70s. And while some Tatars moved back to Crimea, the area was now predominantly Russian. Crimea has kept
You
a
can
separate
count on me.
identity
You're
with
going to
its
have good old
autonomous
Rob
status.
to talk you through all this.
Fidel was right about Khrushchev.
Thank you very much for the 26 months resub at tier 3 from Remuskin Red. Remuskin Red, is that a new username? I feel like I would recognize a 26-month tier 3 subscriber more, but I feel like that's a rebrand. Am I correct about this? Yeah, and this is what I'm saying, Lana. Like many Ukrainians sacrificed themselves during the war and to build socialism. And that's just being erased. You know, and I think that's one of the most horrible things about this whole situation. That legacy is being completely erased from history, and people are celebrating that.
Even after Ukraine became a sovereign country.
Мы считаем и будем считать, что Украина наш не только ближайший сосед, а действительно.
No, Familiar Spirit, I just don't agree. I'm sorry. You say, I do think you're drastically downplaying my understanding and disdain for U.S. imperialism simply because I acknowledge the fact that Russia is the party primarily at fault. U.S. is not at fault primarily. Ukraine is obviously not either. I just don't agree. We're going to have to agree to disagree on this one. Yes, I mean, Russia is obviously at fault for escalating that invasion. You know, that is true. What was going on prior to that, though? And you're again. You can't say that you have this. What is it? What did you say? Disdain for U.S. imperialism while pretending that they just didn't play any role in provoking that. In my opinion, deliberately provoking it. You know, I don't think it's that complicated to point out the ways that NATO did provoke this, and that there's been decades of diplomacy, efforts at diplomacy being made, which were just ignored by us at every turn, that have led to this situation.
Наша братская республика.
Today, with the weight of all this history, Ukraine has few clear options. The new pro-Western government in Kiev is invested in preventing any breakaway from East Ukraine. Those regions with a significant population of...
I'm not saying that. Jesus, straw man. You can read the chat logs. I mean, from my understanding of your position, familiar spirit is Russia 100% at fault, NATO 0% at fault. That, like, am I wrong about that? Really? Like, that seems to me, unless I'm mistaken here, that seems to be the argument that you've been making. And I just fundamentally don't agree with that analysis.
Of ethnic Russians remain the country's industrial base. While the idea of Russian annexation is now bandied about, it's unclear in which direction.
But I mean, even then, though, that's even if that is your stance, that it's a 51% Russia, 49% NATO. That's even that is acknowledging that it's not this like black and white thing.
Now scheduled for March 16th. Russian annexation is an option. Also,
what would be acceptable to Kiev, what would certainly be acceptable to the West.
It's just not black and white. It's not Star Wars. It's not Harry Potter. You know, it's not.
Crimea to have some kind
if you acknowledge the role that NATO played in provoking the conflict, then it's not black and white. That's just like, I'm not going to budge from that. I'm not. If you, as you are doing, as you're acknowledging the role that NATO played in provoking it, then that by definition makes it not black and white. I mean, if you're saying that it's 51%, 49%, that's definitionally not black and white. Like, just right there, you know? I'm not gonna budge on that.
Super autonomous status.
But so far, both sides of this confrontation have been unable to find common ground.
Crimea was, is, and will be an integral part of Ukraine.
The Ukrainian government understands extremely well that Russia will always be a neighbor. Ukraine has to live with Russia. The problem is that Putin isn't so sure that he...
And here's my final word on this, familiar spirit. Also, Russia should not have invaded. Pretty hard to disagree with either either, I hope. I think my main point is that, you know, I'm anti-war, and I think terrible things have happened in this invasion, regardless of whatever nuance you want to have about it. The thing that I do try to acknowledge on here is that I am sympathetic to the view that Russia saw what was happening in Ukraine from the fall of the government replacing with a pro-NATO, pro-EU, pro-American government and anti-Russian government, the arming and funding of these neo-Nazi groups, which has been going on. There's been plenty of mainstream reporting on that. The expansion of NATO and all these things, that they viewed that legitimately as a threat to their security. And I think you can acknowledge that while also saying Putin bad, invasion bad. But there's a legitimate claim, there's a legitimate viewpoint that they viewed all these forces as being a threat to their security, especially when you, as Norman Finkelstein was doing, acknowledging the historical understanding of World War II and the fact that 30 million Russians died in World War II, and then they see NATO, and which is an explicitly anti-Russian military alliance, arming and funding neo-Nazi groups directly on their border. NATO also, which was founded and run initially by former Nazis, right? With all these factors, that they viewed that as being a legitimate threat to their security. That's the only argument I've been making on here for the last 2 years now. And I think if you can acknowledge that, you can still say invasion bad, Putin bad, but that's definitionally not black and white, good versus evil, Harry Potter, Star Wars, the way that it's been framed in our discourse here in the West.
He wants to live with Ukraine.
Anyway, that was interesting from noted Kremlin propaganda outlet. New York Times, near CNN.
Poroshenko will have a hard time winning back hearts and minds in this city as the people of Donetsk sweep up the debris of their homes and livelihoods They are hardened against a president they say is killing his own people. We are Ukrainian.
I know it's been convenient to forget that this was going on, or to suggest that the arming and funding of these Ukrainian militias just started in 2022, and certain progressive commentators that I really like and respect a lot, I think have unfortunately fallen into this, or pretending that this process only began a year and a half ago. But there's plenty of mainstream, non-Kremlin, non-gray zone reporting that's been going on that I think proves that to be false.
People in Kiev, they are not brothers for us. The shells hit these homes days ago, but the tears are still fresh.
27-го, 28-го, 29-го очень сильно. Фактически мы живем в подвалах.
We live on the ground. It was so hard for 2 weeks, especially for 27, 28, 29th. But only today it's quiet.
This has been lively.
Sorry.
I love it.
2 people were killed outside this block of flats last Wednesday. One of them was a 50-year-old woman, the other a 34-year-old woman.
And again, is the 50-year-old woman that was killed in this shelling attack, was that a Russian proxy? You know, it's not just Russian proxies that have been getting killed in this conflict for 10 years. It's actual human beings, you know, like civilians, women and children. And, you know, it's, you can't just say like, oh, well, they're Russian proxies, so it's like they get what's coming to them. Like, that's not, to me, that's not acceptable. If you're going to be anti-war, then you have to be anti-war all the time, not just when Russia invades, but when this was going on prior to that, which we were supporting, we were arming and funding one side of this conflict.
Her husband, who won't talk to us, he says he's in shock, managed to make it down to the cellar with their little child, but she just didn't have the time. And this is a story that repeats itself over and over in dozens of apartment blocks, with civilians being killed by the constant shelling around Donetsk. The city's trauma hospital is filled with a civilian wounded, shrapnel embedded in the flesh and bone of market sellers' legs, the broken limbs of pensioners far too old to run. There was one war, and this is the second war, this old lady tells me.
Like, is this lady a Russian proxy?
In 1940, in World War II, and I will
we have to arm these neo-Nazi militias because they're fighting Russian proxies in the East, you see. Like, these aren't Russian proxies. These are just human beings that are trying to go put their lives.
Switching to the Ukrainian language, she makes a
Ukrainians, you know? Some of these people are Russian speaking, some of them are ethnically Russian, but they're fucking Ukrainians. The people that we're supposed to be caring about, remember?
Poroshenko, Mr. Poroshenko, please listen to us. Why don't you understand your people? Be a man, be human. Please stop your aggression. Stop this war. But there is little sign of that. This once thriving city is now half empty, its railway station bombed. The forces unleashed by this conflict, greater perhaps than Mr. Poroshenko can control. Diana Magne, CNN, Donetsk, Ukraine.
Again, that's not RT, it's not the gray zone, it's not Jimmy Dore, it's not Kremlin propaganda. You know, this is fucking CNN 10 years ago. I know it's become we've all agreed, I guess, collectively to forget all of this reporting and forget that it was going on, but I think we do ourselves a disservice, and we have an inaccurate analysis and I think an incoherent viewpoint of this when we just conveniently forget that this shit was going on for the last 10 years. And we were a part of this, you know, we supported this. We were supplying the bombs that were being used to attack these civilians. You know, and that's not something, even no matter how unpopular it gets in our discourse, that's not something I'm going to stop doing. Weird that those people don't want the Azov battalion roaming their streets and kicking their doors in. Yeah, it's weird that they are not into that. Folks, I gotta say, I gotta go soon. I gotta leave to go pick up my kid in like 10 minutes. I have not gotten up. I've not taken a break. I've not really like promoted the stream at all over the last 3+ hours. But I would like to just remind everyone, and I want to thank as well all the raiders from Majority Report that came in here today and stuck around and had this conversation. I know some of these conversations are uncomfortable.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
I know this viewpoint that I'm articulating on here isn't always very popular and can make people feel very uncomfortable. But I appreciate everyone that came from the raid there and stuck around and hung out with us today. Thank you so much, Diego, for the 2 gifted subs. And I'll just remind people that if you enjoy this kind of analysis or this kind of commentary or this viewpoint that I try to articulate over here on twitch.tv/Rob Rousseau each and every day, please subscribe to TRRS like our friend Sikalufakis just did. Gifted a sub. Thank you, Sikalufakis. Please subscribe. It helps me continue to do this kind of work. It helps keep this show on the air.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you, Mustache Imperial, for the gifted sub as well. I appreciate that a lot. You can join this community. I think it's a really wonderful community that we've built up over here on TRRS. Get all the emotes, some of the best emotes in the platform. Join the community.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you, Clavicinist. Thank you. I appreciate that. Glad there's some people covering world news with some thoughtful consideration. That's what we're trying to do over here. And thank you, Brian, aka Lennon Smesh, for the gifted sub. Thank you. We do have a possible hype train on the way as well, which would be a wonderful way, a hype-filled way to end the stream today. Arguably the most subversive stream on Twitch, arguably, and which I would say subversive history, maybe just a hair less, right? Just a fucking nanometer thin separation between the two. Definitely the most triangular stream as well. Just a mustache hair less. That's absolutely right. So any other takers? Would any other generous chatters support the work that I do here on Twitch?
Good old Rob to talk you through all this.
To have these conversations and these discussions. Thank you, Brian, for another gifted sub. Thank you. And even if you're not able to subscribe, folks, I would encourage you to please smash the follow button as well. Even if I understand that not everyone has like disposable income to throw around on Twitch. Totally understandable. I don't really either, frankly, because I'm a fucking Twitch streamer is my main job, so I don't have a lot of disposable income. But if you're not able to subscribe, please do just smash the follow button. Please smash the follow button and join the Discord server as well.
Count on me. You're gonna have good old Rob to talk.
Which will you'll get notifications when I go live. You know, you can still be part of the community, even if you are just a lurker, even if you're a follower. That's also very, very helpful as well. Sponsored by, of course, the Revolutionary Rush.
You can
energy
count
drink.
on me. You're gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Oh goodness. Sin Chow, thank you so much for the 29 months resub.
We simply use the computer
One
to
of the
mark
most
up
valuable
the size of the
community
account.
members. Thank you, Sin Chow, for the 29 months resub at tier 3. Thank you, Cinnamon Challenge. And thank you, Lana, as well, for the 100 friend coin. I appreciate that, Lana. I always appreciate when you come and hang out in the chat.
This is some guy, Rob Russo, some leftist based in Canada. I was turned on to this sick individual, and I found this.
Hello, Dan Simpson Raiders. Get in, bring it in here. Dan Simpson chatters. Welcome in. Thank you for joining us. I'm on my way out. I got to leave in about 10 minutes, but I appreciate you joining us. We had a lively discussion today talking about Russia, Ukraine, which I know Dan focuses on a lot. And I appreciate Dan's also nuanced and materialist understanding of this subject. I know it's kind of few and far between here on Twitch. So thanks for joining us, Dan Raiders. And we are in the middle of a hype train as well, again. So if you do support the show, you want to support the work that I do here on Twitch, please subscribe to TRRS. We got a hype train going on. Not only can you subscribe to this program and support the work that I do here
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
But you can also get all the wonderful emotes. Thank you, Dan, for the 13 months of Prime. Look at that. Dan Simpson putting his Bezos bucks where his mouth is. Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that.
We simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account.
And thank you, Ben, as well, for the 100 friend coin. I'd be a little more critical. I've kind of not been paying that much attention to like the protracted argument that's been going on about Brianna in the chat. You'll excuse me.
You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
I'd also be a little more critical of BJG given what happened with the Bernie 2020 campaign, but that's just me. I mean, that's one place where I would disagree. And I talked before, I don't agree with everything Brianna says, but like in my understanding of like the Bernie campaign, Brianna and David Sirota were in the camp that they wanted to try and win. And wanted to take it to the Democratic Party establishment, like what Bernie was saying, and wanted to go after Biden and attack Biden and go in attack mode and fucking win, And unfortunately, I think Bernie went to the other side of that. The let's be nice to everybody. Let's not upset my friend Joe Biden too much. Let's not help Trump or help whoever by saying mean things about Biden. That's my understanding of where she was in terms of like the Bernie campaign. And I don't agree with everything she says, but I actually agree with that viewpoint. I've talked to Sirota about this, about that campaign, about their views on that. And, I agree that that's what the strategy should have been employed. I don't know if Bernie would have won. I don't know if he would have won if they had used that strategy, but I certainly agree way more with that strategy than the let's be nice to everybody. Let's not upset the apple cart too much viewpoint, which is what Bernie ultimately leaned into. And thank you, Jeremiah, on Twitch for the 17 months tier 1. Thank you. Yeah, the Bernie endorsing Biden has been pretty upsetting, but of course, me pointing out that that's bad was, of course, really mean and terrible that I did that. Remember, many people were very angry with me about this, but clearly I was wrong, and it's actually fucking great that Bernie's now promoting Biden. We're close to the end of this level 3 of this hype train, folks. I think one more sub or one more gifted sub could get us over the hump.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to
look at that,
talk you through all
Sikalufakis.
this.
Thank you for the gifted sub. Thank you. Look at that. Wonderful. Thank you, Sikalufakis. I appreciate that. The most important election of our lifetime, brother. Yeah, it's happening. Got to get in line. Get in line. If you don't, it helps the Republicans, you see. So. Rob will remember the support when he becomes God Emperor. Of course. Of course I will. Absolutely. So do any other generous chatters want to support TRRS and support the fledgling community that we have built here? I can even put on the video. I can put on the video. I've got a little orientation video. I've got a little orientation video we can put on in case anyone's not seen it.
Thank you for expressing interest in the...
If you're not sold on the community, this is just a little orientation kind of HR onboarding video to explain what the community is about. It's so good. There's a few viewers that haven't seen it. So if you're unfamiliar with this community and what it's about, this little video is just a little helpful explainer. So we got another 3 minutes left in this hype train. Perhaps another generous chatter will be convinced by this video to support this community. Let's go check it out.
Thank you for expressing interest in the Friendship Triangle community. We would be thrilled to have you on board as a member of our exclusive platform. As you may know, the Friendship Triangle is Twitch's only two-dimensional, triangle-shaped, friendship access and trickle-down clout, tiered reward system. Today you have an amazing opportunity to join the base level of the Friendship Triangle system. Once you are part of the community, you'll have the ability to rise through the ranks and achieve higher levels of access and rewards. One way to do this is by gifting subscriptions to your fellow members or by inviting your friends and family members to join our community. As you ascend the tiers, you will be exposed to a range of new and exciting benefits, such as exclusive content, advanced features, and access to our elite community members. We are confident that you will enjoy all the perks that come with being part of the Friendship Triangle. However, we also want to remind you that not all friends and family members are to be trusted, especially those who may not support your new lifestyle. That's why we encourage you to focus on building meaningful relationships within our community, where you will find like-minded individuals who share your interests and values. If you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team. We are always here to support our members and ensure that your experience with the Friendship Triangle is enjoyable. We're glad that you are considering joining the Friendship Triangle community. We look forward to seeing you rise through the Chaos Zone and all the way into the elite tier. It's not a cult.
So I think that should clear up any possible misconceptions that people have about the community. So again, I really have to go in about 5 minutes. So if there's any other generous chatters that would like to support TRRS, join the community, support the work that I do on here, get all the emotes, become a member of the Friendship Triangle system, all for the measly price of $5 per month. That's nothing. That's nothing. You can lose $5 per month and you won't even notice. Well, maybe some people might notice, you know. But you get something in return for that. You're not just giving it away. It's not charity. You're getting something precious in return. Called content. Not even just content though, community. Thank you, Easelcat, for the fistful of friend coin as well. I appreciate that.
You can count on me. You're gonna have a good
Ben,
old
thank you for the
Rob
gifted
to,
sub. I
talk you
appreciate
through
that.
all this.
Clavicinus, what do you think? Should I just not come back because of this guy? In all honesty, I haven't really been following your argument that much. So I can't really say. I'd be happy if you did come back, but I like Matt, aka unelectable. Oh, fuck. I'm getting confused about his username now. Unelectable Airwaves. I'm sorry, Matt. I'm sorry. Who's a member of the community that I appreciate his work a lot, so I'm not going to throw him under the bus on this either. I hope you do come back, though. Seriously. I hope you come back. Anyway, thanks so much for contributing, folks. Thanks for contributing to the show. I appreciate it a lot. I got to go now. I got to go pick up my kid from school. I appreciate all the support. I enjoyed this lively discussion about this today. I really did. Thanks, Lana. Thanks for stopping by. I'm glad you could come hang out today. Give my regards to David Tovarish. I enjoy his analysis and his commentary. I hope everyone has a nice evening. I will be back tomorrow. I'll be back tomorrow, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's 1 a.m. Pyongyang time. And we'll have more of these very engaging discussions and discourse tomorrow. Thank you, Diego, and thanks again for your support today and every other day as well. Okay, I'm going to go. I'm going to raid now. Enjoy, everyone. I'll see you in the Discord server, and I'll see you tomorrow right here on twitch.tv/Rob Rousseau. Tomorrow, 12 p.m. Eastern, 1 a.m. Pyongyang time. Goodbye for now.